Hey everyone. Tonight we're going to step away from our cozy beds, fully stocked refrigerators, and delivery apps and head back in time to a period when your next meal was not only unpredictable, but most likely awful. Take a moment to think of the worst meal you have ever eaten. Perhaps it was a burger from a petrol station that you realized was a grave error even as you purchased it. Perhaps it was an airplane chicken that looked suspiciously gray. Imagine spending the rest of your life eating a far worse version of that meal every day. We are on our way there. Considering the everyday reality of this menu, let's be honest, most likely you won't make it through this. A modern immune system would go into a panic from which it would never recover due to the extreme caloric deprivation and dirt. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to the video before you settle in, but only if you truly like what I do here. It's an easy and silent way to help the station. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is in the comments section below. Seeing our small community spread out throughout the world, sharing this peaceful time, never ceases to amaze me. Now turn down the lights and, if you like that gentle background hum, turn on a fan. And let's take it slow as we embark on our journey tonight. This room is the size of your planet now. Historians would refer to this small, single room as a peasant's crock hut. Clinging to a rudimentary wooden frame, the walls are made of a tough mixture of mud, straw, and animal excrement called dubuel and daub. There aren't any windows, just a few tiny shuttered windows that occasionally allow in a blast of cold air or a sliver of gray light, but never both. Under your thin leather turn shoes, the floor is chilly, damp, and just packed earth. Because of the open hearth in the middle of the room, there is a persistent fog of wood smoke in the air. It coats the back of your throat and hurts your eyes, and bitter flavor that you've had since birth. The only protection you have from the hordes of insects that reside in the thatched roof above you is this smoke. And you accept the trade-off without question. The big black cast iron kettle, the most significant item in your life, hangs in the center of this hazy, murky world. It hangs over the low, smoldering fire from a hook. Your entire life revolves around the quiet, soot-stained god. It is the clock, the boiler, and the stomach of your household. When anything is added to your day, it starts, and when you take your small share out of it, it ends. This saucepan is never empty. It's never thoroughly cleaned. It is an ongoing cycle of survival and sustenance, a live, breathing, seething creature. You ask, what's inside? You're aware already. You've been aware of pottage all your life. Don't picture a filling, tasty stew. Put any idea of a creamy porridge or a chunky vegetable soup out of your head. Though it's a bleak pre-medieval version, this is the ancestor of those dishes. Whatever grain you are able to cultivate on the little plot of land that the Lord of the Manor reluctantly gives you forms the basis of your pottage. Usually, barley or oats are coarsely ground into a rough grit. A bad harvest can occasionally consist of nothing more than the dusty mixture of grain, chaff, and mill floor sweepings. Water that has been dipped from a nearby creek is added to the pot along with this grit. The same creek where the animals of the community drink and urinate. The vegetables from your toft, the little garden plot adjacent to your hut, go into this watery gray gloom. You add whatever you can find. A few little woody turnips, a tough-stemmed leek, a handful of wrinkled peas, and the outside leaves of a cabbage. Nothing has been peeled, nothing is carefully cut. The typical grit between your teeth is enhanced by the dirt that is still adhered to the roots. Modern foodies romanticize the farm-to-table experience. But this isn't it. This is a last-ditch effort to gain weight and delay the gnawing emptiness in your stomach for a few hours. You may be lucky occasionally. While gathering firewood, you may come across certain wild herbs, such as dandelion greens or nettles. You add them for the hazy, bitter greenness that briefly breaks the monotony, not for a burst of vibrant, herbaceous flavor. Historians continue to debate whether the peasant cottage pot's contents change dramatically with the seasons, or if it was a gloomily constant throughout the year. The dish's basic character, a dull, grainy, brownish sludge, remains the same, even though summer may give more greens and autumn more root vegetables. It is referred to as a continual stew. The pot is never scraped out completely. Whatever is left over after you finish your evening meal serves as the foundation for the following day. More water, another handful of oats, and possibly a wilted carrot will be added in the morning. Over the course of days, weeks, and even months, the flavors simply blend and blend. It is the original slow cooker, but the development of rich, nuanced flavors is not the aim. It's to avoid the utter catastrophe of an empty pot. The ghosts of previous month's meals are actually in the soup you're eating. It's a sobering realization. The spoonful you're going to eat contains possibly a small amount of the sour cabbage from 3 weeks ago. Taste is a kind word, and it tastes well. It is incredibly boring and completely soul-crushing. With hints of soil and smoke, the main flavor is that of damp grain. It can occasionally acquire a mildly sour fermented tang if it has been cooking for an extended period of time or if the weather is warm. The worst thing is the texture. It's a lumpy, gritty slurry that resembles wallpaper paste or watery cement mix. One day it's thin, the next it's a thick, spoon-standing sludge. You merely process it rather than chew it thoroughly. The lukewarm lump slides down your esophagus and settles heavily in your stomach as you drink it. It's not what you or I would consider food, it's fuel. It is the very minimum needed to give you the energy to work in the fields from dawn until dusk tomorrow, which will yield the grain needed to produce more of this identical pottage. Like the filth on your floor and the smoke in your lungs, the cycle is unavoidable. Your life is like a pot cooking. The act is not complete even when you bring a spoonful of the lukewarm pottage to your lips. By alone, it's too shallow and unsatisfying. The second, and possibly more significant, part of your meal is reached for with your other hand. A chunk of bread, it rests next to your wooden bowl on the rough-hewn table. Again, though, you must ignore any contemporary image that comes to mind. This is neither a fluffy bun, a crusty sourdough, or even a straightforward, healthful, whole wheat loaf. You have a wedge that was cut from a thick, black, and dense round, a brownish-gray disk of compressed gloom. It is more of a geological specimen than a loaf. This is the foundation of your everyday existence, and it is a really sad thing. Maslin bread, a popular kind, prepared from a blend of wheat and rye cultivated in the same field, may be its official name. The ingenious hedge a medieval farmer used to protect one crop from another failed. However, it is more frequently made entirely with rye or even barley, particularly in leaner times or further north. You know, the soft, powdery dust isn't the flour. Bran and husk fragments abound in this rough, grit-filled dish. It's a dreary shade of gray-brown. It has a dense, close-crumbed texture and a peculiar, earthy, sour flavor that you've long since forgotten about. It is the complete antithesis of the Lord's bread in every way. That has been carried up to the great house on feast days previously. This bread, known as man-cheek bread, is created with the best sifted wheat flour, which gives it an incredibly bright white color. It appears to be a whole other kind of food, as soft as a cloud. It's not a cloud, your bread. Your bread is a rock the size of your fist. Your one-room hovel is devoid of an oven. You can't even imagine the luxury of having your own oven. The law requires you to use the Lord's community oven, just like everyone else in the hamlet. Known as a banality or feudal duty, this is a well-accepted historical truth. The oven is built and maintained by the Lord, and you have to pay a charge to use it, usually in exchange for some of your dough. Your mother or wife would have carried the family's dough to the village baker once a week, if you're lucky, or perhaps every 2 weeks if you're not. This infrequency indicates that your bread is made for durability rather than enjoyment. It is possible that the loaf you are currently eating is 10 days old. For roughly a day, fresh bread is a memory before it starts its unavoidable change into a brick. The situation becomes really bleak at this point. Although bread is already a nutritional powerhouse, it frequently contains ingredients other than wheat, water, and starter. The extent of the most severe types of adulteration is a topic of controversy among historians. However, it is evident from historical court documents and personal narratives that it was both a frequent reality and a persistent worry. From the baker to the miller, everyone in the chain wanted to increase their earnings. Because the miller may have taken more than his fair share to bulk out the flour or make up the weight, your valuable grain may return from the mill lighter than it should. You may add a variety of shady things: sawdust, clay, chalk dust, and fine sand from the mill floor. You could combine all of these with the flour. Occasionally, less expensive fillers were employed, such as ground and dried peas or beans, which were at least edible if not precisely what you had paid for. You're holding the outcome in your hand. As you chew, you can sense it. A consistent, low-level grit is present. You hardly notice the texture because you're so accustomed to it, but your teeth do. Your teeth will probably be worn down and flattened by years of grinding, not just coarse brand, but actual sand, by the time you're 30. For you, having a toothache is not an inconvenience. It might be a death sentence. Additionally, you will experience an upset stomach if you are unfortunate enough to receive a loaf that contains a higher concentration of filler. A thick, indigestible knot that provides no nourishment but mass. It's the biggest culinary fraud ever. Food that silently starves you while filling you up. With this stuff, you could probably construct a wall, and there are days when you think that's what's going on in your intestines. You can't just bite into the bread since it's so hard and aged. You rip off a piece with your knife, the same multi-purpose knife you use to clean your fingernails and repair tools. After that, you dip the piece of bread into your pottage bowl and let it there until it becomes tender. It becomes a hefty, sodden sponge as it absorbs the thin, oily liquid. You eat it like this. This is how the pottage and the bread combine to form a single, cohesive, brownish-gray mush. The taste of survival is a combination of the flavors, the blandness of the gruyere, and the sourness of the rye. Before swallowing, you work the mushy, grainy mass in your mouth carefully and meticulously. An odd and peculiar anecdote from the era states that your bread defines your social standing. You were closer to God and the king if the bread was whiter and finer. You are defined, marked, and kept in place by your heavy, dark bread. It is the ideal representation of your life. It's challenging. In fact, it is boring. It is filled with unseen dirt that gradually wears you down. And you should be thankful that you have it at all, because as awful as this bread is, the only worst thing is not having any bread, which you will soon learn to be a fear. With a familiar heavy weight, the last of the sodden bread and pottage falls into your stomach. But tonight, you are acutely aware of how little remains, so it's a burden that doesn't bring any consolation. After the autumn harvest, the sack of mixed grain in the corner of your hut appeared to be reassuringly full, but now it sags, looking pitiful and loose. The last of the dried peas have been dug from the bottom of their bag, and the few salted fish that are left in the barrel are leathery. The most dreaded time of year is upon you. Agricultural historians refer to it as the hungry gap, but you know it better. Approximately from May to late June or possibly July, this is the gloomy time of late spring and early summer. This paradox is terrible. The world outside is teeming with fresh life. The length of the days is increasing. The birds are chirping in the hedgerows, and the fields are turning a bright green with fresh barley and wheat shoots. However, this burst of life is a kind of pain for you. Food is promised, but it won't arrive for weeks or possibly months. Although nature's abundance is evident, it is not yet consumable. The food reserves from the previous year are, to put it simply, completely depleted, and the fresh crops are too young to pick. The fear of the hungry gap does not happen all at once. In the depth of winter, it's a sluggish, creeping dread that gets worse every week. For months, you have been reducing the amount of pottage each day and cooking bread with less flour and more stuffing. Rationing has now gotten to the brink of disaster. Even your already scant meals have turned into ghosts of what they used to be. With a few stray grains and a lone turnip floating pitifully in the kettle, the pottage is reduced to little more than brownish water. After months of a mild ache, your stomach abruptly clenches with a sudden, intense pain. The impacts are evident everywhere. Normally a place of rhythmic, calm labor, the community has turned quiet. People's faces are pale and haggard, and they move more slowly. There is a worried silence in place of the children's usual laughter and chatting. When you see your own children, you can see that they are very malnourished because their limbs are thin and their tummies are beginning to expand a little. They are silent and listless, their normal energy gone. You are more frightened by the silence than by any scream. When you stand up too soon after working your strip of land, you experience persistent low-grade vertigo. Your body is beginning to devour itself. The extreme fragility of the food supply during this time is a widely accepted historical truth. There was no method to import food from a location that had an excess, no worldwide network, and no refrigerated transportation. You had to rely only on the food and storage capabilities of your community. A single poor harvest brought on by excessive precipitation or an extended drought was disastrous. An illness that ravaged the valuable animals or a blight on the crops could send the entire town into hunger. The annual Hungry Gap became a recurrent nightmare of possible famine as a result of the Little Ice Age, a period of climate cold that started in the 14th century and made these poor harvests much more common. Your waking hours turn into a never-ending urgent calorie computation. You find yourself gazing at objects that you wouldn't typically think of as food. The straw in the thatch, the leather of your shoes. You gnaw on a willow bark twig for the bitter diversion it offers, not for nourishment. Hunger manifests physically as a hollow aching that numbs your insides and clouds your judgment. It makes it difficult to sleep, to think, and to do anything but dwell on the emptiness. The June sickness is a peculiar and depressing small detail from this period. Although it isn't a recognized medical term, peasants used it to describe a specific sickness and lethargy that struck them in the early summer. It was only the physical expression of chronic, intense hunger. Due to weakened immune systems, they were vulnerable to any sporadic illness. A common cold that you may have recovered from in the autumn could now develop into a deadly case of pneumonia. An infection from a little wound made while using a tool could cause a delayed, excruciating death. Your body has run out of fuel and is unable to fight. Naturally, this does not apply to the Lord of the Manor and his family. They produce fragile young birds all year long because of their dove coat. They have carp and tench in their fish ponds. They have a large, well-protected granary. They and their retainers salvaged its contents. You can see smoke coming from the kitchen chimney of the manor house. You are aware that they are eating up there. They're doing more than just getting by. They're eating. Its unfairness is a bitter, biting pill. However, you're too frail and preoccupied with the problems of your own family to truly feel the rage. Everything else is smothered by the hunger. The exact mortality rates during a typical Hungry Gap are still up for debate among historians. However, it is evident that the extremely young and the old died first. You get a chilling sensation of hopelessness as you gaze at your youngest child and your elderly father, whose breath is becoming shallow. It's a race against time between the green shoots in the field, and you don't know if you can win. It's nearly empty in the cooking pot. You can no longer ignore the gnawing pain in your gut. Your thoughts and actions are dictated by a dull fire. The meager rations of pottage and grainy bread are a thing of the past as the Hungry Gap has tightened its hold. Now, your ability to survive rests on what you can gather from the outskirts of the cultivated world. Your attention moves from the deserted hut to the woods, the huge, menacing area that encircles your community. There is a lot of ambiguity in the forest. It is the Lord's territory, a resource that is fiercely protected. A wild lard that could be the difference between life and death, however, is also a location of possible nutrition. You consequently turn into a forager. With a ragged burlap sack and a fervent hope, you trudged out at daybreak. You look at the trees, the bushes, and the ground. This walk in the woods isn't nice. The peaceful interaction with the natural world. A handful of calories is the prize in this high-stakes treasure hunt, and starving is the penalty for failing. The safe bets and the familiar are your initial objectives. Using a piece of cloth to gently pinch the stinging leaves, you gather nettles. They give out a pleasant, although slightly bitter, green mass when boiled for a long time in the pottage pot. Digging for the stiff, earthy roots of dandelions, you gather their bitter greens for a gloomy medieval salad that probably tastes of dirt and is probably undressed. In a world of blandness, you seek out wild garlic, a plant whose strong flavor is a startling and welcome burst. These are the low-hanging fruit of the foraging world, the easy wins. However, they are insufficient. They are not the solid sustenance your body longs for. Rather, they are slivers of nourishment. You must therefore search more thoroughly. You begin searching for roots that your grandmother has only told you about. You look for pig nuts, which are tiny nutty tubers that are quite hard to locate, but tasty and nourishing. To find the tiny brown treasure, you must gently dig around their slender, fragile stems with a stick or your bare hands as you follow them down into the ground. Although it's a small accomplishment, finding one is a moment of triumph. To prepare a supper, you would have to find 100. This is where the real risk starts. It is frighteningly difficult to distinguish between a poisonous plant and an edible one. This is a basic historical fact about foraging. Carelessness is bred by desperation. You're searching for what you think are wild parsnips, but they look a lot like hemlock waterdrop wort, a plant so infamously poisonous that it was known as hemlock. This plant has enough venom in a single root to kill a cow, and its poisons cause a terrible demise, beginning with a sardonic smile, which is characterized by a rich smile on the victim's face. The stories have been told to you. A complete family in the adjacent village was destroyed after using the incorrect white root to make a pottage. Each mushroom is a risk. Among the safe ones, you are familiar with the large, unmistakable field mushrooms that grow in the common pasture. However, 100 different kinds emerge from the leaf litter in the wood's murky, moist light. Some have a deep, savory flavor that is a gift. Others will waste valuable calories you don't have by making you extremely ill for days. And some will murder you, such as the death cap or the destroying angel, who appears to be really attractive. The death is quite brutal. You'll feel good for a day or possibly 2 after eating it. It's too late by the time the severe cramping in the stomach starts. Your liver and kidneys have already been ravaged by the chemicals, and you will suffer a protracted and painful death. You look at a group of white mushrooms. You must make a decision as your stomach rumbles with hunger. Is the risk worthwhile? The amount of botanical knowledge that the typical peasant actually possessed is still up for debate among historians. Was it a collection of folklore and dangerous speculation, or was it a wealth of hereditary wisdom that had been passed down through the generations? Most likely, the truth is somewhere in the middle. Although there are some things you know for sure, the others are hazy, and your hunger compels you to bet in those hazy places. To test a plant, you can use traditional methods such as applying it to your skin to see if it bothers it, or tasting a very small amount to see if it has a bitter or burning taste. However, these approaches lack reliability and are more superstitious than scientific. The idea of a full hope dinner is a peculiar and somewhat somber anecdote from this time period. The most dubious, hardly edible items you could locate were used to make this dish. It took days of leaching and flowing water to extract the tannins from bitter acorns, rough tree bark, including mosses and lichens, that might be pulverized into a material resembling flowers. These were last resort foods that provided the slimmest chance of survival when everything else had failed. They would provide little to no actual sustenance, but they would rip your insides apart while filling your gut. It was a means of deceiving your body into thinking you were full while you were still wasting away. With your sack heavy but empty of wealth, you head back to your hut as dusk approaches. A bunch of wilted greens, some muddy roots you hope are the proper kind, and a handful of tart, Unripe wild berries that will make your teeth ache are all included within. You add water from the stream and empty the contents into the pottage pot. A thin, swampy-smelling soup starts to emerge as it heats up. The unknown roots and leaves whirl in the murky water as you watch it bubble. You are aware that this meal has the potential to either save or kill you. You don't care anymore because you're so hungry. All you have to do is eat. You were not killed by yesterday night's thin forage soup, but you were not fed either. Now, hunger is a physical beast that is tearing at your internal organs. Your mind is emptied out, leaving behind only a single, intense craving for flesh. Your body yearns for its density, fat, iron, and overall life-giving properties. A deep, savory memory that seems more like a dream. You can practically taste it. But since the most easily accessible source of meat, the animals that swarm the fields and forests surrounding you, is strictly prohibited, you are not permitted to dream of this. You gaze out over the vast forest from the edge of your little piece of land. A deer may be seen walking elegantly between the trees, causing a flicker of movement. You hear a wild boar grunting in the distance. Squirrels, rabbits, and pheasants fill the air. To your contemporary thinking, this is a free-range butcher shop and a landscape of potential. As a medieval peasant, you see it as a place of dread and temptation. Hunting is neither a sport nor a hobby to you. Poaching is a crime, and it is a crime. Furthermore, the punishment is neither a slap on the wrist or a fee, either death or mutilation. This is the truth of the harsh legal regulations known as forest law, which were imposed in England by Norman rulers, chief among them William the Conqueror. This historical reality is essential to comprehending the predicament of the peasants. The forests weren't owned by the government. They served as the king's own playground and pantry. Only he and the nobility to whom he gave privileges were allowed to hunt the chase's beasts, which included foxes, wolves, and wild boar in addition to deer. Large tracts of England were declared royal forests in order to enforce this, making them subject to a harsh judicial system distinct from common law. It was more than just forests in a royal forest. Villages, fields, and whole towns might all be included in this repressive jurisdiction. The purpose of the penalties was to serve as a scary deterrent. You might lose your sight if you were caught stalking a deer. You risk having your feet or hands amputated. The punishment was frequently hanging for repeat offenses or for killing a person. There were serious repercussions for even minor infractions. In the royal forest, you risk being flogged if you cut down a tree for fuel. It was against the law to own a dog big enough to possibly chase a deer unless you had it lauded or expedited. In a lovely procedure, one of the dog's front paws had 3 claws removed, making it unable to run quickly. It was an obvious message. The Lord owns everything in the forest, and if you attempt to take anything from it, you will pay with your life. This law is ingrained in your bones. You remain feeble as a result. It maintains your compliance. There will be dozens of men, a pack of baying hounds, and a joyous atmosphere as the Lord and his guests embark on a grand hunt. In a single afternoon, they will kill more deer than you could ever eat. Sport, the excitement of the pursuit, and the prestige of serving a superb roast at their feast are the reasons they do it. For the sole purpose of providing for your starving children, you either do it or dream of doing it. The unfairness is as glaring and obvious as a piece of glass. So you turn to the dark. You turn into a silent, desperate robber and a creature of the night. Deer cannot be hunted. It's too risky. The beast was too big to conceal. You concentrate on the little fry, which the nobles derisively referred to as vermin. You get better at setting traps. On a recognized rabbit run, you create a tiny, delicate loop with a bit of twine or a delicately bent sapling. The art is subtle. The snare needs to be tensioned and positioned precisely. With your heart racing with a mix of terror and hope, you inspect these traps in the darkness before dawn. The snare is usually empty or has been sprung by a leaf. However, you discover a rabbit with its neck trapped in a loop one morning. A wave of sheer horror quickly follows the surge of triumph. You now have illicit things in your possession. With trained efficiency, you wring the animal's neck to swiftly kill it, then stuff it into your tunic. The Lord's warden, a forester, appears to be hiding in every shadow, and his duty is to apprehend individuals such as yourself. The longest journey of your life is the walk back to your hut. The rabbit's chilly body presses on your skin, weighing down your life. Some historians hold the strange and fringe view that there was an entire subculture of poaching signals and indicators. A specific knot tied in the grass, a specific branch placed across a route. These might have been alerts to patrols, messages between poachers, or directions to a good location. Scholars continue to debate whether this is romantic legend, such as the stories of Robin Hood, or a reflection of a hidden reality. There is no band of merry men for you. You are the only one there, scared and alone. The air is thick with conspiracy back in the hut. You move rapidly and fervently as you skin the rabbit. It must be used in its entirety, and all traces must be eliminated. Late at night, when the smoke won't be visible, the skin will be scorched in the fire. Buried deep in the garden will lie the guts. The biggest risk is the meat itself, a pitiful quantity once distributed among your family. It cannot just be roasted. The aroma of cooked meat would spread, a fragrant promotion for your offense. Toss it into the continuous pottage pot after chopping it into small pieces. The typical murky gurel masked its flavor and substance. You look for the small pieces of rabbit when you eat the pottage that evening. In a sea of blandness, every tiny morsel of meat is a gem, a powerful and flavorful explosion. It has the feel of a holy communion of defiance, a sacrament. A glimmer of life returns to your children's eyes as you watch the meat, and you are more than certain that you will repeat it. Not for wealth or fame, but for the taste of flesh and your family's survival, you will risk blindness and death. You had a brief boost of vigor from the illicit bunny, which is now only a memory. However, it didn't address the second main issue with your daily intake, which is what to drink. Your thirst is bothering you all the time. There is always a requirement because of the strenuous labor in the fields, the salty preserved foods that make up your limited variety, and your body's basic need for water. However, one of the riskiest things you can do is to quench your hunger. You walk to the communal village well, or more often to the creek that flows past your community's boundary. A wooden bucket is lowered into the water. You try not to take a close look at what's floating in it when you draw it up. The water has a slight, disagreeable odor and a brownish hue. This stream isn't a pure, gushing brook, and you know why. It serves as the all-purpose utility channel for the village. Families wash their dirty clothes in it upstream. A few hundred yards away, the local tanner scrapes hides and throws the foul-smelling, chemical-laden wastewater into the river. When an animal needs to be killed, the local butcher rinses the blood and carcass into the same stream. Most importantly, it acts as the de facto sewer for waste from both people and animals. Sanitation is an entirely foreign idea. There is no sewage system in your village. People use cesspits that are excavated close to their dwellings to relieve themselves. These pits often overflow during periods of severe rainfall, causing their contents to seep into the ground and subsequently into the stream's water table. Animals are allowed to roam about and urinate anywhere they like. Your only source of water is contaminated with all of this biological waste, which is teeming with bacteria like Salmonella, E. coli, and the microbes that cause cholera and typhoid. A single cup of this water would constitute a biological time bomb to a modern human, ensuring a trip to the ER. It's just water to you. I have a strong feeling that this water is bad. You've witnessed what occurs? People are often struck down by what you term the flux or dysentery, especially the elderly and newborns. It is a terrible disease that kills a person in a few days by causing severe stomach cramps, fever, and watery, bloody diarrhea. The germ theory of disease is something you don't comprehend. It will take centuries for that scientific revolution to occur. You blame it on poor air quality, an imbalance in your body humors, or God's wrath. You do, however, draw the connection. Drinking too much water can cause illness, particularly during the hot summer months when the stream is low and stagnant. What is the other option then? Ale. The solution is in a big earthenware jug on your table. Or little ale, more precisely. Throughout the day, both men and women, as well as children, drink this popular beverage. This brings us to a well-known, widely held historical truth that is frequently misinterpreted. The main reason you drink ale isn't to get wasted. It is paradoxically safer than water, so you drink it. Unbeknownst to you, boiling the water during the ale-making process eliminates the majority of dangerous bacteria. Bacterial growth is further inhibited by the fermentation process, which is the process by which yeast turns carbohydrates into alcohol. As a result, the beverage has a far lower chance of giving you a fatal case of the flux. Let us clarify what this ale is, though. It's not the hoppy, flavorful, potent craft beer you may be familiar with today. Before the 15th century, hops, which give beer its distinctively bitter flavor and serve as a preservative, were not frequently utilized in English brewing. An unhopped fermented grain beverage is what your ale is. It tastes good, like bubbly liquid bread, and can be produced with barley, oats, or wheat. It has a little sour tang and is hazy and yeasty. The tiny ale you drink every day is made by rinsing the grain mash a second or even third time, which results in a very low alcohol content of perhaps 2% ABV or less. It's not too strong to be consumed all day while working in the fields, but it's just alcoholic enough to be safe. Holidays and special events would be the only times to drink a stronger, more flavorful ale. A major aspect of village life is the manufacturing of this ale, which is virtually exclusively done by women. In every village there was a brewster or ale woman. When her ale was ready to sell, she would put a broom or a decorated pole and ale stake over her door to indicate that it was ready. She would brew batches of ale in her house. Some people believe that this oddball fact is a distant progenitor of the contemporary bar sign. Ale quality might differ greatly between breweries, and a poor batch could cause complaints throughout the hamlet. The actual nutritional content of this medieval ale is still up for debate among historians. Some claim it was a true liquid bread that helped peasants survive their physically taxing lives and an essential source of calories and B vitamins. Others contend that its main function was to serve as a safe hydrator and that it made very little nutritional contribution. The argument is academic to you. You have it. You have a mug of it to start your day. Yes, you take a flask of it with you to the fields, where you sip it with dinner. It's damp. It is safe and offers a calorie-dense comfort that water just can't match. Your kids also drink it. They are given watered-down little beers from an early age rather than the hazardous stream water. This method was a reasonable act of paternal care, even though it shocked modern sensibilities. A child was much better off being mildly drugged for the rest of their life by a low-alcohol beverage than dying of dehydration due to disobedience. That's why you're thankful for your foggy, sour ale. It's one of the few things you can eat without worrying about getting a violent illness right away. It serves as your defense against the well's unseen toxins. There has been a faint, hopeful murmur around the community for weeks. The oldest daughter of the Lord is getting married. This entails a frenzy of dowry arrangements, political wrangling, and commissioning of brand new clothing for the nobles. It represents a feast, which is significantly more significant to you. Naturally, the manor house is a world away from a feast for you. However, a party this size always has repercussions. In a show of generosity, the Lord will bestow a boon to make sure his peasants are healthy enough to work his farms and offer prayers for his new son-in-law. And flesh will be a part of that boon you ask for. The arrival of the day is a pleasant respite from the ceaseless labor in the fields. There is a rare sense of occasion in the air itself, which makes it feel unusual. Then you spot it. A cart bearing the Lord's gift thundering towards you from the direction of the manor home. Naturally, it's not the prime cuts, tenderloins, mutton's plump legs, or beef's premium ribs. All of those are meant to be roasted and covered in pricey sauces on the high table. You own what the cart holds. It's the terrible. The parts of the animal that the aristocratic cook considers unworthy. The entrails, the organs. This might sound more like a punishment than a treat to the picky modern palate. But this is a gold mine of protein and fat to you, frail from a diet of pottage and grainy bread. You look at the heap of sizzling, bleeding internal organs. You can view the kidneys, lungs, liver, and heart. The stomach and the long, coiled intestinal ropes are seen. There may even be a heap of trotters or a decapitated head. You don't find this sight repulsive. A primordial, yearning need makes your mouth water when you see it. The distribution is supervised by the Lord's reeve, a tough guy who is generally shouting at you about your plow. A throng forms. There is no courteous line waiting. This jostling situation is tense. They are all vying for the better parts. You succeeded in securing a portion of the small intestine and a gleaming dark crimson liver. You quickly return to your hut before someone tries to take them away, holding them to your bosom like a trophy of incalculable worth. The preparation problem now arises. It's more complicated than just cooking some liver and onions. Your kitchen, which is the corner of your single room with the smoky stove, has no hygienic regulations. Even so, horrible needs to be handled with caution. The general historical truth is that these animal parts decompose very rapidly. They need to be prepared and consumed virtually right once, particularly if there is no refrigeration. The intestines need to be thoroughly and repulsively cleaned, and the liver already has a slight metallic odor. You start the process of washing the intestines out by taking them to the stream, the same polluted stream you don't drink from. The lengthy tube's partially digested contents are squeezed out, a greenish paste with an unpleasant odor. The cold, filthy water runs through the casing as you rinse it repeatedly. This procedure is essential. The finished product will taste noticeably feal if improperly cleansed. Although it's a stomach-turning task, you approach it with a surgeon's precision. There are several uses for the intestines after they have been cleaned. They are more likely to be used as sausage casings, although they can also be braided and fried until they are crisp, like chitterlings. You can cut up the other tougher organ meats, such the stomach or even the lungs, but you won't have much to stuff them with. Stuff them into the intestinal casing along with a few wild herbs and some of your treasured oat grit. It's a rudimentary kind of banger, a method to extend the meat and make the less appetizing portions more palatable. The term humble pie, which was initially used to describe a pie fashioned from a deer's edible entrails, is frequently used by historians to describe this kind of food. The liver is simpler. You cut it into slices and cook it on a hot stone over a fire, or you may even impale it on a stick. The scent, which is the complete opposite of your typical pottage fumes, permeates your tiny hut and is rich in irony and addictive. It is the scent of strength, vitality, and a full stomach. Fat drips into the fire as it sizzles, spitting and releasing more of that wonderful aroma. It seems like a sacred rite. The family is gathered around the fire, staring at the cooking meat with wide eyes, not a single plate to mention. You divide up the cooked liver and serve it on thick crusts of your stale, hard bread. A trencher is a plate that you can eat. It's your first bite. It has a rich, nearly creamy texture. The taste is rich, crimson, and overpoweringly powerful. The strength of it shocks your system after a diet of unseasoned GR. You have never tasted something so good. Knowing that this experience might not occur again for several months, or possibly a year, you eat slowly and relish every bite. A peculiar and somewhat nauseating anecdote regarding terrible consumption is included. How diverse the range of what was deemed edible was. Using the spleen, pancreas, brain, and even the testicles of animals is mentioned in recipes from the time, even for the impoverished. There was no waste. The meat would be removed from the skull after the head of a sheep or pig was cooked for hours to create a gelatinous stew. Eating from nose to tail was a terrible necessity rather than a gastronomic fad. A profound, gratifying warmth permeates you as you consume your piece, sucking the remaining fatty fluids from your fingers. It's a sensation you haven't had in a while. It goes beyond simply feeling full in your stomach. It's the sensation of fat and protein restoring your body's lost energy. For one night, you are feasting rather than merely getting by, and the fact that you are consuming the Lord's trash doesn't take away from the joy. Your diet reverts to its gloomy baseline as the memory of the terrible feast dims. Every day, bread is the primary diet, but not the more safe, but grainy maslin bread, which is manufactured from wheat and rye. Because of the hard environment and poor soil in your area, rye is the most common crop there. It is a tough and durable grain that can thrive in areas where others cannot. Therefore, the bread you eat every day is made completely of rye flour and is dense, dark, and nearly black. You've come to identify its powerful, sour flavor with the taste of food itself. A minuscule stowaway that might unleash hell on your hamlet is the secret, deadly risk that this common rye bread holds. It starts out quietly. A man you've known your entire life, your neighbor, begins to complain about an odd tingling sensation in his fingers and toes. He brushes it off as the cold, but it lingers and intensifies into a scorching sensation that he likens to fire coursing through his veins. His wife and kids then begin to sense it as well. The entire family is affected within a week. The burning ache makes them scream in agony as they writhe in their beds. This is the initial phase of a terrible disease that medieval Europeans called ignoous sakka, or the holy fire. We now refer to it as ergotism. This is a common historical fact about medieval living that is both frightening and fascinating. Particularly after a cold winter and a rainy spring. Ergot, a fungus clavic purpurae, grows on rye and other cereals. The precise circumstances you just experienced. The fungus produces a hard, purplish, black sclerotium that resembles a mouse dropping or a huge dark grain of rye. These ergots are frequently picked with the rye when it is harvested. There is no technology in your small-scale, non-industrial farming to separate them. They contaminate the entire batch of flour when they are simply ground up with the nutritious grain. There's a potent, deadly mix of alkaloids in the bread you've been eating every day. The neighborhood is filled with a frightening fear as you observe your neighbor's family. This is only the beginning of the burning anguish. Toxins in the ergo narrow blood vessels, preventing blood flow to the limbs. The hands and feet of your neighbors start to swell, turn purple, and eventually turn black. The tissue dies. It gets gangrenous, mummified, and dry. The blood-starved limbs become numb and, in a terrifying turn of events, can break off at the first touch without suffering any pain or blood loss. Gangrenous erotism is the name given to this type of the illness. You watch as your neighbor, who was previously strong, suffers from internal burning pain and loses his fingers, hands, and feet. However, the illness also exists in a different, possibly even more terrifying form. Another family that consumed the same batch of contaminated bread is going through a completely different experience in another hut. They are shouting out of fear rather than pain. They are experiencing strong, striking hallucinations. In the corners of their smoke-filled room, they spot devils. They spoke about terrible creatures scuttling on their flesh. Their bodies are twisted in violent spasms as they are plagued with convulsions. A distinct mix of the fungus's alkaloids is responsible for this convulsive erotism. The afflicted experience severe mental disorders, such as mania and psychosis, as well as strange postures and muscle twitching. They call the village priest. He hears the ravings about demons and sees the limbs becoming black, and he draws the only inference permitted by his worldview. It's a punishment from God. He refers to it as St. Anoni's fire after the Christian recluse St. Anthony, whose help was sought for those in need. There were pilgrimages to sites where his relics were kept, and this occasionally worked for a peculiar but reasonably rational reason. The trip to the shrine required leaving home and the tainted bread, which was the cause of the poison. The monks would feed the pilgrims after they arrived at the shrine, generally with ergot-proof wheat bread. Their ailments would mysteriously go away, confirming the saint's healing abilities. It was a miracle disguised as a medical remedy. The prevalence of ergotism and whether it can be connected to certain historical events are still topics of debate among historians. Some have controversially proposed that a convulsive ergotism outbreak in a rye-eating population may have been the cause of the strange behavior and allegations of the 1690s Salem witch trials. This idea emphasizes the tremendous and horrifying impacts that this fungus may have on a community, despite the fact that it is hotly contested. People might actually think that witchcraft was all around them. Anxiety is a constant in your life. Is the bread loaf on your table secure? You examine it in search of the ergot's distinctive dark kernels, but they are hidden because they have been ground into the flour. You consume with dread your daily allotment. You get a panic attack every time your fingers itch or twitch. Is it beginning? Are you starting to feel the fire burning in your veins? The very food that is supposed to keep you alive has turned into a possible cause of unspeakable pain, insanity, and disfigurement. It is the height of treachery. You are forced to continue sipping from the poisoned chalice that has become the staff of life, hoping that your family won't be the ones to perish in the flames this time. When a fresh, clean harvest of rye arrives, the dread of St. Anoni's fire slowly fades. However, once one terror has passed, a more commonplace yet unrelenting assault on your senses will simply resurface. The season of slaughter has arrived with the arrival of autumn. You must now murder the few pigs you are permitted to keep, who have gained weight from summertime foraging and scraps, before the harsh winter months prevent them from being fed. A rare and happy luxury, you have a brief burst of fresh flesh. You know it won't last, though. Flavor and texture are not your top priorities. It's preservation, and the most important thing in your universe is preservation. Salt. You lack vacuum sealers, canning jars, and freezers. Salt is in your possession. Again, though, you have to give up your contemporary idea of this mineral. You are aware that the salt is a fine white iodized powder that comes out of a shaker with ease. Your salt is a coarse, lumpy, grayish material that was mined from the earth or collected from coastal salt pans. It has a strong, frequently bitter flavor due to the presence of pollutants, clay, grit, and other minerals. You are going to employ this rudimentary yet effective instrument with ruthless inefficiency. The term corning or salt curing comes from the Old English word corn, which meant any little hard particle, such as a salt crystal or a wheat grain. Make sure to coat the fresh pork chops, hams, bacon, and shoulders with a thick layer of this coarse, grainy salt. You push it deep into the flesh by rubbing it into all the nooks and crannies. The meat's moisture is extracted by the salt. And because of this dehydration, the microorganisms that cause spoiling cannot live there. After the meat has been well covered, it is placed in a barrel and additional salt is poured between each piece until the container is filled. It will gradually change from fresh meat to a preserved, rock-hard slab of salt pork while it sits there for weeks or months. This is a well-known historical fact that shaped the taste of a whole period. Most people's meat and fish were not fresh for the majority of the year. It had a strong, forceful saltiness. This applied to both the sailor on a long journey ignoring salt meat and the peasant devouring his salt pork. It was astounding how much salt was utilized. Enhancing the flavor was not the aim. Its goal was to fight degradation head-on. As a result, the final product frequently had more salt than meat. You pry a slice of pork from the barrel months later, in the dead of winter. It is hard, rigid, and covered in crystals of salt. It's also a gloomy shade of grayish brown. You have to try to make it appetizing before you can even consider eating it. Soaking it in multiple changes of water for hours or even days is the first step. In an attempt to extract some of the overpowering saltiness, you submerge the slab of meat in a pail of valuable water, the same tainted water you use for everything else. The water soon turns into a murky, salty soup. You keep changing it, but it never really disappears. The flesh remains extremely salty even after a long soaking. You cut off a bit and put it in the pottage pot that never goes away. Its main purpose in your diet is this. Some of the flavor and fat from a small piece of salt pork will be released into the gravy after it has been cooking in the pot for hours. Normally a monument to blandness, the pottage will suddenly take on a fatty, smoky, and highly salted quality. Although it's a nice change, the flavor is strong rather than subtle. The rough, crunchy, and still extremely salty bits of beef in your bowl make your eyes water and your tongue quiver. Fish go through a similar process. The other main protein staples of the era were cod and herring, which were caught in large quantities in the North Sea. They became the common salt cod, or stockfish, after being gutted, decapitated, and stacked in barrels of salt. Throughout Europe, this preserved fish was a significant commodity, especially on the numerous meatless days that the church required. It was food for inland settlements like yours, as well as for soldiers and sailors. It was as tough as a board and unbearably salty as the salt pork. Before it could be cooked, it needed to be soaked for a long time and frequently pounded with a mallet to make it softer. The end result was chewy, flaky, and you got it, loaded with salt. An interesting anecdote about the salt trade demonstrates its enormous significance. Because salt was so precious, monopolies and governments controlled it. Centuries later, the French Revolution was influenced by the infamous gabel, or salt tax, which was one of the most despised levies in French history. Having access to affordable, dependable salt is crucial in your day. The complete health effects of a diet so rich in sodium are still up for debate among historians. Despite its success in food preservation, it probably played a role in a number of illnesses, including heart disease and high blood pressure. However, these would have been obscured by the far more pressing dangers of infectious disease and famine. Salt has bludgeoned your palate and sense of taste into submission. You're ignorant of subtle flavors. You're familiar with sour bread, insipid pottage, and sodium chloride's chemical burn. Every meal is a boring, salty task. Its desiccated, salt-saturated ghost has replaced the delight of the fresh fall killing with the dismal obligation of eating it. Yes, the flesh is preserved by the salt, but everything that once made eating it enjoyable is destroyed. It is a harsh and brutal flavor, the taste of survival. Your main weapon against the unrelenting march of deterioration is the salt barrel. But you have other options as well. You must use every tactic you know to prevent your limited food supplies from becoming a foul, inedible sludge because you are caught in a never-ending desperate race against rot. A one-room hut is more than just a place to live. Though dirty and ineffective, it is a food preservation laboratory. The stakes are really high. Each mouthful of food that is destroyed by germs, mold, or vermin represents a permanent loss of your own life energy. The rest of the fall pig slaughter is hanging high over the fire in the smoky rafters of your cabin. These incisions are intended for smoking, a different method of preservation. You hang the sides of the bacon and the hams from the dark, soot-covered beams of your ceiling after a quick salt cure that isn't as intense as the barrel cure, but is sufficient to start the process. Your central hearth's ubiquitous smoke, which blackens the walls and burns your eyes, now has an essential secondary function. This isn't the careful, regulated, chilly smoking of a contemporary craftsman. This process is rudimentary, continuous, and disorderly. Fueled by peat, moist wood, or any other flammable item you can find, your fire produces thick, impurity-filled smoke. This sharp smoke will eventually seep into the meat over the course of weeks and months. Phenols, aldehydes, acids, and natural preservatives are among the substances found in smoke. They keep the fat from becoming rancid by slowing the growth of microorganisms. Additionally, the process gradually dehydrates the flesh, forming a pele, a tough, protective outer covering. As a result, the bacon becomes more of a symbol of perseverance than a delicious joy. It is hard, blackened, and covered in a film of oily soot when you finally remove it. It has a strong wood smoke scent with a tangy, sour chemical undertone. The taste is strong, and, to be honest, a little like licking an ashtray. It must be prepared by scraping off the top layer of soot and grime, then boiling it for a lengthy time to soften it and remove some of the harshness. Similar to salt pork, its main function is to add flavor to the pottage pot by giving the bland gruel its potent, smoky taste. Drying is yet another important method. When you have a brief excess of anything in the late summer or early autumn, you attempt to dry it out. On a piece of fabric by the fire, you scatter wild mushrooms. If you're fortunate enough to have access to an apple tree, you thread up apples to make long garlands of fruit that gradually harden and wrinkle. With plants picked from the forest's edge, you follow the same procedure. Above all, you dry beans and peas. Following harvest, you shell them and spread them out on any surface you can find, turning them daily until they are as dry and hard as tiny stones. When all the meat is gone, these dried beans serve as the foundation of your pottage and your winter protein. This historical truth is widely accepted. One of the earliest food preservation techniques that people have ever used is drying. It doesn't require any extra equipment and is easy to use, but it's a nervous, slow process. Everything can be ruined by an abrupt change in the weather, such as a week of soggy, rainy days. The real enemy then shows up. Mold. Like a hawk, you keep an eye on your valuable food supplies, searching for the first hazy patches of black, white, or green. Mold is terrible. It spreads frightfully quickly, making a side of bacon or a whole batch of dried peas inedible. While some molds are safe, others create harmful poisons called mycotoxins that can kill or seriously sicken people. You're unaware of the distinction. All mold represents defeat to you, a triumph of the forces of decay. How medieval people handled food that was on the turn is still a topic of debate among historians. Did they just trim off the bad parts and consume the remainder, or did they toss it away? The latter is more widely accepted among academics. A single calorie wasted is not something you can afford. You will vigorously scrape out any mold that may have developed on a slice of your smoked bacon. If your bread is stale and starting to turn green, you will chop off the mold that is visible. Toast the remaining portion over the fire to destroy any mold that is not apparent, and then dip it in your pottage. You're in a dangerous, ongoing negotiation with spoiling. You hope that your constitution is strong enough to withstand the stuff you eat, which a modern person would consider hazardous waste. The pests are another issue. Your hut serves as a communal living area. Mice and rats are everywhere, brash and unafraid, capable of chewing through a fabric bag in a single night, munching on your grain and dropping on anything they don't eat. The pests persist despite your efforts to store your grain in heavy-lidded earthenware pots. Even terrible are insects. The bloom is rife with small holes and wriggling larvae due to weevil infestation. You never get them all, no matter how hard you try to sort them out. Some cheeky anthropologists refer to it as accidental protein. This strange and repulsive fact that medieval people frequently and unwittingly ate a large quantity of bug stuff is most likely accurate. The race against decay is not yours. At best, you are struggling to the point of desperation. Each day is a struggle. You examine the dried peas, sniff the bacon that is hanging, and check the salt barrel. As a reluctant specialist in the minute indications of spoiling, you are the curator of a museum of decay. Your senses are incredibly sensitive to the taste of creeping sourness, the smell of rancid fat, and the sight of fuzzy mold. It's a never-ending, thankless, and exhausting job. It's a job you have to do, because nature's unrelenting attempt to recover your food poses a continual and immediate threat to your survival in a world without refrigeration. The harvest has finished. Your little plot of land has produced its scant crop. A couple of coarse mixed grain sacks. It's the result of a year's work, but it's not much. It's not food yet, but it's the secret to your survival this winter. Just the edible kernels are hard. You must take it to be processed in order to make the flour that will make your gritty bread, and the gross that will make your pottage thicker. And that means you have to deal with the miller, one of the most hated and feared people in your village. For the trek to the watermill on the river, you either hoist one of the hefty bags onto your back or load it onto your cart. The lord of the manor owns the mill, which is a monopoly, just as the communal oven. Another one of those feudal duties called a banality is this one. It is against the law for you to use a hand-worn grain mill at home. The miller is the lord's designated agent, and all grain cultivated on the estate must be processed in his mill. He has tremendous control over you as a result, and he has a history of abusing this influence. In medieval literature, the image of the avaricious, thieving miller is a potent and enduring stereotype. The miller is portrayed in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales as a savage, cunning, foul-mouthed beast with a thumb of gold. This popular historical device wasn't merely a work of fiction. It represented a legitimate and pervasive peasant complaint. The person who stood between your daily bread and your hard labor was the miller. He could have stolen from you in 100 different ways. The sound of the water churning the enormous millstones greets you as you approach at the mill. Everything is covered in a pale layer of stifling dust, which is thick in the air. The miller, a burly man who is always plastered in a layer of white flour that appears to accentuate his sneer, comes out of the shadows. With a trained air of contempt, he hefts your sacks and judges their weight after you say your business. His fee is paid in kind and is referred to as mulcture. He has the right to keep some of your grain in exchange for milling the remainder. He could easily take more, even though the legal amount was frequently set at approximately 1/16 of the total. His hands are swift and cunning, but you keep a close eye on him as he measures out his piece. He may employ a phony bottom or a manipulated measure. When he takes his portion, he may scoop generously and sweepingly, but when he measures yours, he may scoop sparingly and flatly. His most well-known method, which is what led to the saying, "a miller's thumb of gold," was to artificially increase the weight, and consequently his share, by pressing his thumb down on the scales while weighing the wheat or grain. Flour would whiten the thumb of an honest miller. However, a thieving one was supposed to become as valuable as gold by pressing it down and taking more than his share. Your grain is fed into the hopper, which feeds it into the area between the two large grooved millstones after the toll has been taken. While the bottom bed stone remains still, the top runner stone rotates. Between them, the grain is crushed and ground, and a coarse, warm meal emerges from the sides. The second layer of deceit starts at this point. A modest, continuous stream of your flour may be redirected into a concealed bag by the miller's concealed pipes or chutes. A bit from the next man, a little from you. Ultimately, adds up to a clean, pilfered profit. But it's not just about stealing your bloom. He is also well known for tampering with the things he returns to you. Don't forget the sawdust and sand in your bread. Frequently, the miller is the main offender. He may pick up dirt, chaff, flour dust, and actual sawdust from sweeping the mill's dirty floor and combine it with the flour he gives you. To compensate for the weight he has taken, he may add inexpensive fillers like dried bean meal or crushed chalk. The flour you receive is sufficiently heavy, but its nutritious content has been diminished. In addition to making the loaf smaller and less nutritious, it will also cause your family's teeth to erode. There is a peculiar and perhaps sinister piece of folklore concerning millers. They were frequently connected to the devil in magic. The mill itself was an enigmatic, potent, and perilous location. It was frequently situated on the river near the village's edge, where the wild and the cultivated coexisted. Like an alchemist, the miller was in charge of this massive, booming apparatus that changed one substance into another. People were distrustful of him because of his reputation for stealing and his seeming ability to summon money out of thin air. There were many tales of millers who had created pacts with evil powers to guarantee that their mills would always run smoothly and that they would always make a lot of money. Whether the miller's reputation was universally merited or if he was just a handy scapegoat for the peasants' resentment of the harsh feudal system is still up for debate among historians. After all, the entire system was set up to take money out of your labor, and the miller was merely a lord's representative. But the sheer number of court cases, complaints, and humorous portrayals indicates that the issue was widespread and very genuine. The miller served as the public face of the daily exploitation you experienced. You pick up your bag of freshly milled flour, which is probably compromised. You are forced to accept what he provides you and pay his price. It would be a death sentence to prohibit him from the mill for cheating, or it would be a beating from a man who works all day lifting bulky grain sacks. With a frigid comfort, you bear the sack's priceless dusty weight. Even though you made it through the encounter, you are aware that you were duped. Making bread using this flour will result in a somewhat less healthy and gritty bread. For the next few months, every meal you consume will bear the invisible golden imprint of the miller's avaricious thumb. You bring your bag of tainted flour back from the mill. Slung over your shoulder was the dusty evidence of the miller's thievery. The difference between your home life and the semi-industrial processing environment is striking as soon as you return to your hut. Your home is a dirty petri dish where your food will be turned from raw components into meals. The modern idea of kitchen hygiene is so far off that it seems like it belongs in another universe. It's not a separate place where you cook. You eat, sleep, and live in this corner of the one smoke-filled room. You are aware that the floor is made of packed soil. It's impossible to properly clean. It's uneven, and it's always wet. On occasion, you may use a crude twig broom to sweep it, but this will just agitate the dust, filth, and dried animal feces. The floor becomes permanently soiled as a result of spilt food, pottage pot grease, and errant particles of vegetable waste getting trodden into it. This level serves as the platform for preparing your meals. A rustic, unsteady table constructed from a few wood planks arranged over trestles serves as your main work area. It is a piece of furniture with multiple uses. It's where you cut your vegetables, knead your dough, and serve your food. It's also where you could sit and delouse your kid's hair, swaddle a baby, or fix a tool. Hot water and soap are never used to clean the board. You need to burn your limited firewood to get hot water, and you don't have any soap. At most, you could use a moist and probably dirty rag to wipe it down or scrape it down with your all-purpose knife. The remains of 100 dinners are crammed into the wood's deep grooves and fractures. A flourishing bacterial ecosystem. Additionally, you're not by yourself here. This is a widely accepted historical fact that is difficult for the contemporary mind to understand. At best, it was difficult to distinguish between animal and human living quarters. It was customary to bring your most valuable livestock inside at night, particularly during the chilly winter months. Your lone chicken may be scurrying around on the ground, a valuable source of the occasional egg. Just a few steps away from where your dinner is made, the family pig, if you're lucky enough to have one, may be chained in a corner, snuffling and urinating. This was a sensible way to keep the animals safe from the cold and stop theft. However, the hygienic consequences are astounding. The air in your house is infused with animal feces and dander, as well as the fleas, lice, and ticks that they transmit. The air itself is a viscous mixture of pollutants. Although it is helpful for smoking meat and keeping some flies away, the smoke from the open fire fills the room with soot that causes cancer and gets on everything. The air is stagnant and heavy with the odors of smoking, unwashed bodies, animal waste, and boiling pottage, because there is no ventilation at all. Flies are a continual source of buzzing agony during the summer. They land on the bread dough you knead, the sleeping dog, your baby's face, and the heap of vegetable leftovers in the corner. Shoving them away is a pointless gesture. They are merely a feature of the environment. Watch how you bake a loaf of your own, crusty bread. You fill a wooden trough with the miller's flour. You fill it with water from the polluted stream that you have brought in a bucket. A sourdough starter is a live culture of bacteria and yeast that is kept in a container. The history of this leaven, or starter, is interesting and peculiar. The dough was saved from the previous batch, a real, breathing connection to all the bread you've ever baked. It's possible that some families had beginnings who were theoretically generations old. In addition to being romantic, this meant that any harmful bacteria that entered the starter would continue to grow endlessly. Using your unwashed hands to work the grainy flour, you knead the dough on the multi-purpose table. As it passes, a chicken pecks at a piece of dough that has fallen on the ground. You gnaw it away. You take a moment to soothe the crying infant before continuing to knead without cleaning your hands. In the same wooden trough, possibly covered with the same multi-purpose cloth you use for everything else, the final dough is allowed to rise. You're not considering germ theory or cross-contamination. Before you have to go out and work the fields, you are considering making the bread. The actual effects of this lack of hygiene on everyday health are still up for debate among historians. Some contend that because to their continuous low-level exposure to infections from birth, medieval people must have evolved extraordinarily strong immune systems. Their immune systems were seasoned veterans, and their bodies were a battlefield. Others argue that the poor average life expectancy and the startlingly high neonatal death rates were primarily caused by this pollution. The elderly or the young could easily die from a simple stomach illness that they caught from a contaminated food item. Most likely, the truth combines the two. Although you are more resilient than the average person nowadays, you are also far more likely to pass away from something that could have been avoided with a simple bar of soap. Lastly, think about your kitchen tools. For pottage, you have a large iron cauldron. For cooking over the fire, you may have a griddle or a skillet. You have some bowls and spoons made of wood. After every use, these are not cleaned. At best, you can swish them in a pail of cold water or wipe them out. Every meal's flavors, fats, and bacteria are absorbed by the porous wood of the spoons and bowls, leaving them oily and permanently discolored. In between chores, you wipe your all-purpose knife, which you use to cut food, repair leather, and polish your nails, on your jeans. This is the actual situation of your kitchen. It is a place of filthy, desperate survival rather than culinary art. The meal you generate here is a tribute to the human stomach's tenacity, not your expertise. The leaves have changed from green to a fiery rust of gold, and the air becomes crisp. For you, this marks the beginning of the yearly autumn slaughter, one of the most important, gory, and stressful occasions of the peasant calendar. Livestock that cannot be fed economically during the hard winter months must be put down at this time, usually around Martmus in November. There is a lot of hectic, intensive activity going on, an unexpected fleeting flood of fresh meat that needs to be prepared at a terrifyingly high rate of speed before it goes bad. You may have brought your family's pig inside the hut on chilly evenings and fed it scraps all summer long, but now it's a marked animal. It is a walking ladder of protein and fat, and it is your greatest asset. Nothing sentimental about this. Pigs are not pets. The time has come to profit from this important investment. Everyone in the hamlet is working on the same big project. The lowing of the rare cow and the squealing of piglets break the typically peaceful rhythm of rural life. Noises that are suddenly cut off. The butchering process is a messy group activity. It takes place in the muddy yard you share with your neighbors just outside your hut. There is no compassionate stun gun or sterile abattoir. The pig's frightened squeals reverberate throughout the village as many men struggle it into place. A long, sharp knife is used to really kill the victim. The pig's corroded artery is severed as the sticker's image of a guy with a strong stomach and steady hand drives the knife deep into the pig's throat. It's a visceral, aggressive act. The most crucial step is the blood collection that comes next. A woman, possibly your mother or wife, holds a pan or bucket right beneath the leaking incision. This liquid is rich in precious iron, and not a drop may be wasted. To stop the blood from coagulating, it is quickly agitated. It will be the main component of blood sausage or black pudding. It will be placed inside cleaned intestines and boiled after being combined with oat groats, sown, animal fat, and sometimes a few herbs. This is a traditional cuisine that has been consumed for thousands of years. A very effective method of preserving the animal's most perishable parts and transforming them into a nutrient-dense, high-calorie meal. The task is only getting started once the pig has been bled out. The carcass is either hung from a tree or placed on a trestle. The hair must then be removed. Buckets of boiling hot water are used to achieve this, and bell-shaped instruments or knives are then used to rapidly scrape the pig's skin. The skin becomes smooth and pale once the bristles are loosened by the hot water and scraped off in clumps. Pig hair that has been wet and heated has a strong, lingering fragrance. The evisceration follows. The steaming mass of internal organs is carefully removed by cutting open the pig's abdomen from throat to tail. This surgery is delicate. The contents of the bladder or intestines may leak out and contaminate the meat if you inadvertently puncture them. A small catastrophe. The organs are sorted right away. A rare and delightful feast, the liver, heart, kidneys, and pluck are laid aside for immediate eating. The women are given the intestines to start the arduous task of cleaning them so they can be used as banger casings. The stomach is cleansed and emptied so that it can be used as a container or for foods like haggis. Brawn or jellied stock is made by boiling the head and trotters. This is the fundamental idea behind your butchering. There is no waste. This isn't a modern approach to cooking. It is an economic reality that cannot be negotiated. From the head to the tail, from the blood to the bones, every part of the animal serves a purpose. Lard will be made from the rendered fat in order to cook and preserve it. To extract the remainder of the gelatin and flavor for the pottage pot, the bones will be cooked for days. Even the bladder can be cleaned, filled, and used as a waterproof bag or as an improvised balloon for the kids. This process's sheer inventiveness is the subject of a peculiar and somewhat graphic anecdote: the use of all remaining scrap. Following the removal of the major slices, any remaining tiny pieces of flesh would be scraped off and minced to create meatballs. An early kind of hog rind, the skin could be fried into a crispy snack after being stripped of its hair. You have a deep-seated aversion of waste, which makes you an expert at deconstruction. There is a great deal of pressure. Bacteria and time are your rivals. The fresh organs and flesh need to be prepared right away. It is necessary to rub and pack the cuts that are going to be salting into the barrel. It is necessary to hang the parts to be smoked in the rafters. You have to make custard out of the blood. Slaughtering, gutting, cleaning, chopping, salting, and boiling turn the entire town into a madly organized production line. Under the fire's flickering light, the activity continues from sunrise until long after sunset. The earth turns into a bloody, muddy mess. The rich perfume of the first fresh meat roasting over the fire, the odor of matted hair, and the coppery smell of blood fill the air. The psychological effects of this yearly custom are still up for debate among historians. Were people made more resilient and tough by the regularity of the murder, which desensitized them to death and violence? Or did it contribute to underlying trauma and stress? You are subtly scarred in this moment by the annual immersion in blood and death. No time for introspection. Blood and grease are all over you. Your mind is concentrated on one daunting task while your muscles hurt. To decompose this creature and ensure that your family has sustenance for the coming winter. It's a gory, unpleasant, and very important day's labor. The autumn slaughter frenzy is ended. The cask of salt is full. The hams are slowly becoming black in the smoky rafters, and the freshly produced blood sausages have been consumed. For the time being, you feel secure. However, you depend on other animal products besides meat. The cow or the few goats you may keep on the village common provide the other important source of your meager meal: dairy. But once more, you have to get rid of any contemporary notions of what dairy implies. Your relationship with it is a never-ending battle against bitterness and isolation. Fresh liquid milk is a rare and ephemeral delight. You don't have any refrigeration. Particularly during the warmer months, a bucket of milk that is taken from the cow in the morning will start to change by the evening. Its natural bacteria will start to grow as soon as possible, along with any impurities that were brought in by the cow's udder, the milker's unwashed hands, or the filthy wooden pail. As the milk turns sour, it will acquire a curdled texture and a tangy, acidic flavor. You believe that only the very young, the very old, or the ill should enjoy fresh sweet milk. Additionally, it ought to be eaten within a few hours of the cow being removed. This historical truth is widely accepted. Milk was not primarily a beverage for adults in the majority of medieval Europe. It served as a raw material and the foundation for goods with longer shelf lives. Most of the milk that was produced was processed right away to make cheese and butter, the only practical means of preserving its valuable protein and fat. Your first line of defense is the butter-making process. The cream is allowed to rise to the top of the milk by leaving it in a shallow pan for a day after it has been milked. Carefully, you skim this cream off. The remaining liquid has little fat and is thin and watery. Buttermilk, or more precisely, skim milk, is what this is. You don't discard it. Nothing is squandered. You consume it, or more frequently, you use it as the liquid foundation for your pottage, which gives it a little protein and a tangy, sour taste. It can occasionally be used to create a very basic sour cheese. An earthenware churn is filled with the cream. After that, you start the arduous churning process, stirring the cream for what seems like an eternity with a wooden plunger or dasher. It is a physically taxing job that is frequently done by the women in the home. After a while, a miraculous change takes place. The cream's fat globules start to group together and separate from the liquid. You collect these sticky, golden clusters. This butter is yours. The real buttermilk is the liquid that remains. An additional minor benefit of the procedure is a pleasant, sour beverage. However, this butter is not the pale yellow, creamy, delicious product. Because of the beta-carotene in the grass the cows eat, it is frequently a rich yellow or nearly orange color, and it is highly perishable. It needs a lot of salt, including coarse, gritty salt, to be preserved. Wooden firkins or earthenware pans are then filled with this salty, frequently slightly sour butter. It is always fighting against rancidity, but it will keep for a while. The fat molecules will gradually oxidize, acquiring a strong, bitter taste and a foul, pungent odor. You know what it's like to taste a little off butter. A certain amount of rancidity is simply a feature of the flavor profile, unless you are eating it within a few days of churning. The other important product is cheese, which is the best method for preserving and concentrating milk. This method is a type of controlled spoiling. A coagulant is added to a pot of milk that has been slowly heated over the fire. You don't have Rennet that is manufactured commercially. Using a portion of the stomach of a calf or lamb, which naturally contains the enzyme, or different plant extracts, such as thistle or nettle, was a peculiar but popular medieval technique. As a result, the milk separates into liquid whey and solid curds. The whey is drained off as a greenish, watery liquid. It is rich in minerals and protein. Naturally, it is not thrown away. The poorest of the impoverished often drink it, and it can also be used to boil pottage or feed to pigs. The curds are where your cheese starts. You may just press them in a cloth bag, squeeze out any excess, and consume them within a day or two if you want a simple, fresh cheese. It's crumbly, squishy, and quite sour. However, you must extract as much moisture as you can to make a winter-proof cheese. After being salted and split up, the curds are firmly packed into a wooden mold. The curds are then pressed for days with a big stone on top, extracting every last drop of whey. The outcome is a dry, hard, and dense wheel of cheese. After that, it is brought to a dark, cool location to mature. In addition to developing flavor, this aging process attracts other creatures. A rind of mold will form on the cheese, which you can either scrape off or accept. Cheese mites, which are microscopic arachnids that produce a fine gray dust on the surface, will gnaw at it. The end result is a very salty, highly flavored, and extremely hard cheese that you consume in the dead of winter. It's so difficult that breaking off a chunk frequently requires a specialized tool or even a small hatchet. It's not a cheese that should be cut thinly. It would explode in your mouth and have a harsh, spicy flavor. To add a savory depth, you may also grate some of it into your pottage. Although historians continue to debate the variety of peasant cheeses, the most distinctive features were most likely hardness, salinity, and a strong, frequently barnyard scent that would be seen as a serious flaw in the majority of contemporary cheeses. You must constantly control and make concessions in your relationship with dairy. Converting a perishable liquid into a stable solid is a race. Because of necessity rather than skill, you are an expert at pressing, churning, and curdling. You associate milk products with sour, salty, and pungent flavors rather than pleasant and fresh ones. They are the tastes of food that has been saved from the verge of deterioration, a tribute to your desperate ingenuity every day. The hungry gap has been suffered by you. You've made it through your kitchen's dirt, the miller's deceit, and the constant barrage of salt on your palate. A baseline of hunger, a persistent low-level aching as familiar as the smoky air in your hut, is what you've learned to live with. However, you're going to encounter hell on a whole new level. In the year 1315, the weather has conspired against you in a way that is not only regrettable but also catastrophic. The rain is the first thing. It was a deluge, not simply a damp spring. It begins in May and never stops. The fields are soaked by a chilly, unrelenting rain that turns your little strips of land into a mudslide day after day. Before they can sprout, the seeds you so meticulously sowed rot in the ground. Mold in the fields flattens and turns black the hay you need to feed your animals for the winter. It appears that the sun has left the world. The catastrophic famine of 1315 to 1317 begins at this time. One of the most severe subsistence crises in European history was a widely reported historical occurrence. The Little Ice Age, a time of extreme climate change, was the catalyst for this continent-wide disaster. It's not a historical event to you. The end of the planet is imminent. 1315's crop is a total failure. Only a small portion of your typical output gets collected, and what you do collect is moist and of low quality, vulnerable to rot and fungus, including the deadly ergot. Grain prices soar to previously unheard-of heights. In a week, the little money you may have saved is spent on a small quantity of short-lived flour. Restricted to his own household, the Lord's granaries are tightly secured. There won't be any respite. The situation gets dire by the winter of 1315. It's reduced to a saucepan of brownish water, flavored with one moldy turnip from the pottage pot that was always cooking. There is no more bread. There is no more salted meat from last year's slaughter. All the edible roots, leaves, and berries have already been removed from the forests. You have consumed the dandelions, nettles, and tree bark. Acorns have been mashed into an indigestible, bitter bloom. The village becomes quiet. The quiet of widespread famine in society. You notice your neighbors start eating the grain they saved for the following year's sowing. It is a decision to live today at the expense of any hope for the future. An act of utter despair. You follow suit. You consume the seeds. The hunger is so overwhelming that it drowns out everything else. Humans deteriorate into thin skeletal forms with empty eyes and weak, sluggish movements. The first people to leave the hamlet are the elderly and the very young, or the death toll starts to rise. You witness another dead being transported to the churchyard for a hurried, shallow burial every morning. The social order starts to disintegrate. Morality and law, the pleasures of a full belly, go. To get a mouthful of food, people will stop at nothing. The impoverished in the adjacent town have been known to consume the corpses of criminals who have been hanged from gallows. A horrible and animalistic suspicion takes the place of the ties of community. Your neighbor isn't your friend anymore. He is a rival for a diversion, a possible robber of the last bit of food you have stashed away. Then the unimaginable starts to occur. It begins with whispered stories and rumors from other towns that are so horrifying that you don't want to believe them. Tales of youngsters who go missing and are never seen again, of travelers who vanish while traveling. This is the last option of a starving populace and the most horrible taboo. Cannibalism. The extent of cannibalism during the Great Famine is still up for debate among historians. Chronicles, frequently penned by monks who might have been prone to exaggeration to highlight the tragedy of the times, serve as the primary sources. Archaeological evidence is scant, but the stories are so frequent and eerily consistent across locations that they cannot be completely disregarded. It was stated clearly by chroniclers such as Johannes Troclo that the impoverished devoured their own children. It is debatable whether this was a frequent occurrence or an uncommon, startling anomaly, but the fact that it was captured at all illustrates the unfathomable desperation of the era. This world of scary rumors is now your reality. You lock your door at night to protect yourself from something much more dangerous than robbers. When you see your own children, their tummies swelled from kwashiorore, their bodies stick thin, you experience a flood of love and a dreadful primordial calculus that you are trying desperately to ignore. Some of the chronicles have a peculiar, albeit highly macabre, detail that points to a hierarchy of this frantic eating. People were rumored to start eating rodents, dogs, and cats until none remained. After that, they would start consuming their own leather items, like as shoes and harnesses. Nobody wanted to acknowledge the last step. You have reached the pinnacle of human life. You are no longer a community member, a farmer, or a father. There is nothing left to eat, and you are a starving animal stuck in this planet. It's not simply lousy food. It no longer exists at all. A yearning so deep that the most heinous deed conceivable is now conceivable is tearing apart the very fabric of your humanity. As you and your family gather in the chilly, dark hut, listening to the rain that continues to fall outside, you question whether you will live to see the next day and what you might need to do to ensure that. The medieval food system's ultimate failure is this. Not only was it disgusting and boring, but it was also so flimsy that it could fall into the darkest abyss. You made it through somehow. The severe famine subsided. The harvest gradually restored to normal after the rains finally ended. However, the event has altered who you are. Or more accurately, we shall let it alter your very station in life as we travel. You might have distinguished yourself in a local dispute or married the daughter of a wealthy merchant by some unfathomable chance. You've been promoted. No longer are you a peasant scurrying around in the dirt. You are now a lord of a tiny manor and a minor noble. The world of the roasting spit has replaced the world of the pottage pot that is always simmering. However, you will quickly learn that having money does not ensure a satisfying supper. It simply creates an entirely new class of repulsive. Excess defines your new life. You now reside in a multi-roomed stone home with glass windows. You have slaves, but more significantly, you have a bustling kitchen that prepares meals for prestige as well as for nourishment. Meat is the main component of your new diet. Its joints are huge and magnificent: pork, venison, mutton, and beef. Now, as a poor peasant, you have daily access to the precise things you once dreamed about. However, you now face a basic issue with your new, affluent life. One that is exactly the same as the issue you had as a peasant: the battle against decay. You still need refrigeration even though you have more food. In your well-stocked larder, the same forces of degradation that caused your meager provisions to mold and simmer are at work. When a deer is brought in following a hunt, it needs to be eaten right away. An enormous amount of perishable meat is represented by a side of beef from an ox that has been killed. A joint of meat can change in a day in the summer heat, acquiring that distinctive shine and the subtle, sweet, sickly smell of putrefaction's early stages. This food is too valuable to be wasted. It provides more than just calories. It is a representation of your riches and influence. It would be an unimaginable financial loss and a harm to your reputation to throw away a good hunch because it seems a little strange. What do you do then? Every noble in your day does what you do. You conceal it, and spices are your go-to weapon. This is a well-known historical truth that fundamentally contradicts how we currently perceive magnificent cuisine from the Middle Ages. We consider pepper, saffron, ginger, cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, and pepper to be subtle flavor enhancers. For you, they are tools of deception, potent aromatics that cover over the flavor and odor of almost rotten meat. The cost of spices is really outrageous. They travel hundreds of miles along perilous trade routes to be brought from the distant, almost legendary realms of Asia. The price of a cow is equal to that of a pound of nutmeg. A horse is not as valuable as a little purse of saffron. They are so valuable that they are frequently kept in a spice coffer that is locked, and only you or your girlfriend have the key. These expensive, valuable powders aren't being used to produce a symphony of delicate flavors. You're fighting deterioration with them in the kitchen. Does the scent of the roast pig start to get a little weird? Wine, vinegar, breadcrumbs, and an incredible number of cloves and pepper will be combined by your cook to produce a potent sauce. Is the fish that will be served on Friday past its best? It will be baked into a thick crust pie with a filling that is packed with sugar, mace, and ginger. In order to totally eradicate the underlying taste of impending rot, the aim is to overwhelm the senses and bombard the palate with a potent blend of sweet, sour, and spicy flavors. Let's see your cook make a standard sauce for a roast meat joint. A thumb-sized piece of ginger, a dozen peppercorns, a handful of cloves, and a pinch of priceless saffron for color are all pounded together in a mortar and pestle. He combines this with vinegar or sour wine, then adds toasted breadcrumbs that have been ground into a powder to thicken the sauce. The end product is a viscous, abrasive, and intensely flavored sludge. The ginger adds scent, the vinegar adds sourness, the pepper adds fire, and the cloves numb. You can only taste this when it's poured over the meat. The meat serves only as a vehicle for the tremendous force of the spice blend and as a texture. The surviving recipe books from this era, such as the well-known curry from Richard II's court, have a peculiar and telling detail. They consistently call for combinations of spices that seem strange and at odds with a modern palate, but they rarely give precise amounts, instead using ambiguous terms like the good amount or enough. Ginger, cloves, saffron, and sugar may all be combined in one dish. It wasn't because their palates weren't advanced. It was because bombardment, not equilibrium, was the aim. Historians continue to debate this hypothesis of spice preservation. Some academics argue that any meat that was genuinely abnormal would have been thrown out and that spices were only employed for flavor and as a show of luxury. They contend that the medieval palate just liked the strong flavors. According to others, spices were mostly used to make somewhat spoilt food palatable, even though they do have some mild antibacterial qualities. Most likely, the truth is somewhere in the middle. You wouldn't consume a dangerously rotting piece of meat. However, if a sufficiently strong and costly application of spice could cover up the defects in a piece of meat that was simply high or ghee, a polite euphemism meaning beginning to deteriorate, it was fair game. A servant is setting a dish in front of you as you sit at the high table in your hall. It has a chunk of mutton swimming in a gritty, black, and aromatic sauce. You bite into it. Your mouth aches from the pepper's heat. A surge of delicious warmth sweeps through your mouth as the scent of the cloves fills your sinuses. The meat itself is hardly detectable. You're consuming your riches. And what you're eating is evidence that the basic issue with medieval cuisine persisted, even for the wealthy. You're still fighting decay in a desperate race. Now, however, you use the gilded aromatic hammer of foreign spices to combat it rather than rudimentary salt. You are prepared for a feast as you sit at the high table in your big hall. It's more than just a dinner. It's a theatrical spectacle meant to impress guests and show off your enormous prestige. A modern diner would hardly recognize the amount of manipulation, decoration, and disguise used on the dish that is about to be presented. Naturalism or emphasizing the component's quality are not the objectives. Making a show, a sequence of gastronomic illusions that shout your wealth from the roofs, is the aim. A queue of servants with huge plates comes out of the kitchen. The first course's centerpiece, the pièce de résistance, is set out in front of you. In its full, colorful plumage, it is a peacock resplendent. As like it were still alive, its majestic tail spread forth. It appears to be a living sculpture, a marvel of jewel tones. This isn't your typical roast fowl either. The process of creating this creature was strange and, to be honest, nasty. It wasn't just pluck and roast that the cook did. The peacock was meticulously skinned in order to preserve its exquisite plumage. Peeling off the body in one piece, the skin with the feathers attached was done with care. After that, the nude fowl was cooked. After cooking, the meat was frequently wrapped in gold leaf or a glaze. After the corpse was roasted, the original feathered skin was carefully fitted or sewed back onto it. After that, the bird was placed in a lie-like position on a dish. Its head and neck were raised, and its tail feathers were spread out and reattached. To make the bird look as though it was breathing fire, some recipes even suggest filling the beak with a piece of cloth soaked in alcohol or gasoline and lighting it. The privilege of creating this amazing creation has been bestowed upon you, the Lord. However, eating it is a really disappointing experience. The meat of peacocks is infamously dry, stringy, and rough. It tastes guy and disagreeable. You bite into a portion of the refathered bird, which is gilded. Additionally, it's like ignoring a gorgeous piece of flavorless leather. Taste was never the aim of the dish. It has to do with the astounding display of its display. This is a widely accepted historical fact about aristocratic feasts. The food's aesthetic appeal frequently took precedence over its flavor. Similar treatment was given to swans and other exotic birds, which were presented as striking but mostly inedible table centerpieces. However, refathered birds are not the only attack on the senses. Your chef is also an expert at food coloring, turning meals into a bright, artificial rainbow with a variety of natural dyes. Food appearing natural is an entirely foreign idea. Making it appear as phony and costly as possible is the aim. The most sought-after hue is a vivid golden yellow that is produced using saffron. Mom is a pottage for the wealthy. A prodigious amount of priceless saffron threads would add a vivid golden hue to a hearty stew of chicken, wine, and almonds. Numerous plant-based and even mineral-based dyes are used to produce other hues. Spinach juice or pounded parsley can be used to make a deep green. Orkel, a kind of lichen, provides food a lovely color, but also a subtle, disagreeable earthy or chemical flavor that gives it a rich purple or violet hue. Alkanet root or sandalwood is used to make a vivid red. With dark spices or dried blood, even black is a desirable color. A medieval edible Mandrian painting could be created by your cook by dividing a single dish, such as a custard or jelly, into sections and coloring each one a distinct, brilliant hue. This activity has a peculiar and somewhat disturbing aspect. Some of the dyes were perhaps poisonous in addition to being unappetizing. For instance, the crushed petals of the toxic larkspur flower were occasionally used to create a vivid blue. Even though the doses may have been minimal, The desire to use such medications shows how much more important the visual effect is than taste or health. It's possible that the food you're eating is visually stunning, but is slowly poisoning you. The symbolic significance of these colors is still up for debate among historians. Was the extravagance just a show of wealth? The capacity to pay for the costly death agents and the trained personnel needed to administer them? Or did the hues have deeper significance, maybe connected to the prevailing humoral conceptions of medicine at the time? A green dish may be perceived as chilly and dry, but a red one may be perceived as hot and juicy. It's likely that your feast was a sophisticated color-coded attempt to balance your guests' health in addition to being a visual extravaganza. You notice a dish of jelly beans glimmering, a lurid green, as you glance down the long table. A tray of little meatballs is placed next to it. They were stained half black with blood and half yellow with saffron. A piece of fish that has been mashed into a paste, reshaped into a fish shape, and then painted with red and white stripes is presented to you by a servant. The environment of food has been tortured into fabrication, creating a kaleidoscopic, almost hallucinogenic experience. It's a rather unsettling feeling. Nothing tastes as good as it looks. The lovely peacock has a flavor similar to leather from shoes. The vivid green jelly has a faint flavor similar to parsley and pond scum. Ginger and cloves are the flavors of the red and white striped fish paste. There is total sensory dissonance in this meal. You are not consuming any food. Symbols are being consumed by you. Every dish that is wildly colored and fashioned in an unnatural way is proof of your strength, your capacity to control nature, to turn the real and the raw into the impressive and the artificial. In some respects, it is equally as filthy as the peasant pottage. It's food with its soul torn out and a garish, inedible outfit in its stead. The procession of naturally dyed jellies and re-farmed peacocks is just the start. You get comfortable for the feast proper, which is the primary event. This is not a straightforward three-course dinner. It's an endurance event that takes a lot of hours. A marathon of consumption and show, regulated by strict ritual and geared more towards pageantry than enjoyment. Despite the massive fire raging in the hearth, the vast hall is frigid. You can feel a small draft on the back of your neck all the time, and the stone walls seem to absorb the warmth from the air. A sequence of courses, or eliminates, makes up the feast's framework. However, a medieval course consists of more than one dish. Dozens of dishes are taken out of the kitchen simultaneously and arranged on the long tables in a wave. There could be 20 or 30 objects in the first course. Various roasts, pies with meat and fruit, pottages sweetened with almond milk, fried pastries, beef, mutton, and pork, as well as those vibrant jellies. The sheer number of options is daunting. A smorgasbord of disarray in the kitchen. The first pick gives you the best view from the high table. However, food quality and variety quickly decline as one moves down the social scale. For your smaller retainers and visitors, there are long trestle tables in the center of the hall. Their meals will consist of fewer dishes and meat from less appetizing cuts. It is inconceivable that everyone would eat the same dinner. Everyone is aware of their place at the feast, which is a tangible representation of the social pyramid. The majority of the food at the medieval dinner was, at best, served lukewarm, according to popular historical accounts. To lessen the chance of a fire in the main house, the kitchen was frequently located in a separate structure. In any weather condition, the food had to be made, placed on platters, and then transported across an open courtyard. A large portion of the food is already cold when it arrives at the tables in the big hall. The meat is tepid, the pastries are no longer crisp or warm, and the gravy is chilly and congealed. More of a chilly centerpiece than a heated dinner. The beautiful boar's head is carried into the sound of trumpets. You have no plate of your own. As an affluent lord, you have a trencher instead, which is composed of a thick, circular piece of stale bread. On this edible platter, you arrange the food of your choice, giving the gravy-soaked trencher to the underprivileged or the dogs that gathered at your feet was more customary and considered a show of kindness, but you might eat it yourself at the conclusion of the meal. The trencher may be constructed of wood or even pewter for less important visitors. You use a personal knife to spear bits of meat and bring them to your lips while eating with your fingers. Although it does exist, the fork is regarded as an odd, feminine Italian invention that will not be widely used in England for centuries. The meal moves at an odd pace. An hour or so later, a trumpet blows. The first course is cleared away by the servants, with most of it hardly touched. There is so much food that it is impossible for anyone to try it all. This results in a great deal of waste. The visitors never even consume the enormous amount of food that was prepared for the feast. The remainder would be handed as weapons to the people who gathered at the castle gates, and what was still presentable might be eaten by the servants. Next comes the second course. 20 to 30 more dishes are arranged. More exotic birds, intricate pies, some with live birds inside that would fly out when the crust was cut, and sweeter, more dessert-like meat dishes might all be included in this course. Even when you're already satisfied, you must finish the feast. You pick at some other things. The hall is getting colder. The wine and ale are flowing freely. The discussion is loud, and your hunger is dwindling. There are entertainment options in between the classes. There could be a group of acrobats performing in the middle of the hall. Long, meandering ballads about heroic evenings and tragic love affairs will be sung by a minstrel. In addition to adding to the feeling of occasion and prolonging the event, all of this also adds to the meal's coolness and the evening's marathon-like feel. There is a peculiar and quite repulsive fact regarding table manners, or the absence of them. Unwanted bones and scraps would be thrown straight onto the floor, which was typically covered with straw or rushes. These rushes were probably only changed a few times a year rather than every day. The floor of your vast hall is a crushed mat of rotting food, ale that has spilt, rushes, and animal feces. Writing a little later, but considering long-standing customs, the Dutch humanist Erasmus described defects as a disgusting assortment of vomit, spittle, dog and human urine, beer spills, fish pieces, and other abominations unfit to be named. The actual function of such extravagant, unpleasant, and theatrical feasts is still up for debate among historians. Did the participants actually enjoy them, or were they a burdensome but essential power ritual, a kind of societal duty? It was more of the latter, according to the facts. A feast served as a political instrument. It was how you scared opponents, rewarded loyalty, and solidified relationships. The pleasure of the meal itself was almost of secondary importance. You're worn out when the third course is put away and the last course of cheese, wafers, and spiced wine is served. For the past 4 or 5 hours, you have been seated on a rough wooden bench. You're chilly, you're swollen. Additionally, you have been subjected to a constant barrage of loud entertainment and lukewarm, highly spicy food. It was an amazing demonstration of your money and influence. It was a victory for politics. However, as a real meal, it was in some ways as unpleasant as ignoring a piece of salty, rock-hard bread in a smoky peasant house. It's the end of the extravagant theatrical feast. But you still have a complicated connection with food. As someone with education and prestige, or at least one who hires a doctor with education, your diet is not dictated by taste or hunger. It is governed by a convoluted and perplexing medical theory framework that has shaped Western philosophy since the ancient Greeks. According to the theory of the 4 humors, you must eat what is considered suitable for your particular constitution rather than what you desire. This is a well-known historical fact that is crucial to comprehending how the medieval aristocracy approached food. According to humoralism theory, the human body is made up of 4 vital fluids, or humors: phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, and blood. Each humor has 2 of the 4 characteristics: hot, cold, moist, and dry, and is associated with one of the 4 elements: air, water, fire, or earth. These four humors are perfectly balanced in a healthy individual. An excess, deficiency, or imbalance of one of the humors results in illness. Additionally, your prevailing humor determines your personal temperament. You are regarded as sanguine, dominated by blood, which is hot and moist if you are inherently happy and hopeful. You are phlegmatic if you remain composed and stoic. Phlegm, damp and chilly. You are choleric, yellow bile, heated, and dry if you are ambitious and easily irritated. Additionally, you are melancholy, black bile, cold, and rainy. If you are prone to depression and reflection, however, it doesn't end there. Everything that you might eat or drink has humoral qualities of its own. For instance, pork is thought to be chilly and wet. Red wine has a dry, spicy flavor. Fish are wet and chilly. Hot and moist are carrots. Your doctor and cook are responsible for creating a cuisine that is precisely balanced with your individual humoral composition. Eating is not done for modern-day nourishment or pleasure. Medical fine-tuning is a sensitive, ongoing process. Assume that you are a hot-tempered, ambitious, and naturally caloric person. You're a hot, dry person. You must therefore stay away from hot and dry foods in order to keep your equilibrium, as they may intensify your calorie tendencies and cause indigestion, rage, and possibly even fever. Garlic, onions, and spicy red wine should be avoided. To combat your innate tendencies, your diet should instead emphasize foods that are moist and cool. Consume a lot of lettuce, fish, and watery fruits like melon. A modern palate may find the food pairings and preparations that result from the application of this philosophy completely strange. Since fish is inherently moist and cold, it was nearly always prepared using a hot and dry procedure to create equilibrium. This explains the abundance of recipes for baked or fried fish that frequently include a sauce made with fiery spices like pepper, mustard, or wine. It was a formula for cooking. A well-balanced, nutritious dish is created by combining the heat and dryness of the cooking process and sauce with the coldness and moistness of the fish. It was okay to roast a piece of beef hot and juicy, but to improve its attributes, it should be served cold and dry with a sour sauce. The intricacy is overwhelming. A food's characteristics may even vary based on where it is consumed. A fish from a muddy, stagnant pond was inferior to one from a clear, swift-moving stream. It mattered how old an animal was. Young lambs were thought to have more wet flesh than older animals. Your chef was more than just a chef. He mixed and matched materials according to their purported medicinal qualities, acting as a sort of chemist. The way this method categorized familiar foods is a curious and instructive feature. One of the items that was thought to be the most perfectly balanced was chicken. It is excellent for nearly everyone, especially invalids, and is moderately warm and moist. This explains why chicken soup and chicken-based restoratives are frequently suggested for the ill. It was the superfood of the Middle Ages. However, beef was generally advised to be consumed in moderation because it was thought to be somewhat harsh and prone to producing gloomy black bile. The degree to which this system was adhered to in practice is still up for debate among historians. The cookery books and medicinal literature that have survived are prescriptive. They exhibit the ideal. Was it truly too hot for a choleric lord to turn down a meal of roast venison with peppery sauce? Or was the idea more of a broad rule, a sophisticated defense of the types of foods that the elite were already interested in? Probably a little bit of both. In addition to directing the complex sauces and preparations that were in vogue, the theory offered a distinguished scientific-sounding framework for a diet that was already high in meat and wine. This implies that you have anxiousness when you eat. You have a little cold, which is a moist, cold illness brought on by too many phlegms. In order to correct the imbalance, your doctor sternly advises you to consume hot, dry spiced wine and roasted chicken. All seafood, dairy products, and watery vegetables must be avoided since they will exacerbate your illness. You want to eat a simple piece of cheese, but you're afraid it may upset your humoral balance and make your disease worse. Your diet is an ongoing, perplexing, and frequently conflicting balancing act between your personal preferences and your doctor's strict esoteric beliefs. Food is not meant to be enjoyed, it's medication. Additionally, like the majority of medicine nowadays, it is founded on a wholly incorrect understanding of the human body, which results in a cuisine that is not only frequently unappealing, but also medically ineffective. The scarcity of food causes the peasant to starve. A surplus of faulty theory starves you, the lord of pleasure. Humoral theory's perplexing rules regulate your life as a noble. Your palate is being shaped by a more potent influence, though, a severe or consuming sugar craving. You don't typically use sugar in the kitchen to sweeten desserts. Like cloves or saffron, it is a high-status, exotic, and incredibly costly spice. It was first brought from the Arab world and cultivated in Sicily and Cyprus, and you apply it to everything. It comes to England in hard conical loaves, a rare and valuable item. The modern palate, which is used to a clear distinction between sweet and savory, finds this well-accepted historical fact startling. That split doesn't exist in your universe. Like salt and pepper, sugar is a condiment that is used liberally in almost every dish on the noble table, particularly those that feature meat and fish. A centuries-old culinary evolution is the notion that sweetness should only be added at the end of a meal. Picture your feast table. They bring out the magnificent roast, which can be a joint of hog. A basic gravy is not supplied with it. It has a thick, sweet and sour sauce on top, known as an agradulce or ayu, which is a characteristic of aristocratic medieval cooking. A standard sauce could consist of wine, vinegar, and a generous amount of sugar, thickened with breadcrumbs and seasoned with ginger and cinnamon. The end effect is a cloying, sticky coating that totally changes the meat's flavor to something that isn't appealing to current palates. When you bite into some roast pork, you taste the flavors of vinegar, cinnamon, and sugar all at once. The pork pie is the quintessential illustration of this combination of sweet and savory flavors. In front of you is a coffin, a large pie with a thick pastry casing. The filling is not the straightforward savory combination of meat and gravy you may anticipate when you cut into it. It is a thick mixture of minced chicken or pig that has been strongly spiced with mace and cloves. It is also adorned with an abundance of dried fruits, such as dates, prunes, and raisins. A massive amount of sugar is then added, resulting in a filling that is both extremely sweet, spicy, and meaty. It is a dish that falls somewhere between a dessert and a main entree. A pillar of your food, a gastronomic chimera. The invasion of sugar can even harm fish. You may be offered salmon or pike on the numerous fast days when meat is prohibited. After the fish was poached, it would be served with a sauce composed with wine, ground almonds, a common thickener, and of course, a lot of sugar. A surge of nutty sweetness overpowers the delicate flavor of the fish. Why this sugar obsession? There are several explanations. It is, first and foremost, a magnificent show of wealth. By using sugar so liberally and treating it like any other seasoning, you are announcing to your guests that you are extremely wealthy and can buy the priciest products from all over the world. A food that has been overly sweetened tastes expensive. Second, it is entirely compatible with the humoral medical system that we just covered. Medical professionals categorized sugar as first-degree hot and wet. Because of this, it was thought to have a number of health advantages and may be used as a helpful element to balance other diets. It was believed to be particularly nourishing for the aged and ill, to be healthy for the stomach, and to cleanse the blood. It was genuinely believed that a spoonful of sugar was medicine. The way sugar is presented itself has a peculiar and instructive element. A special dish known as the void or issue would be presented at the conclusion of a large feast. Spiced sugar slates, which resembled medieval breath mints and were little discs of hardened sugar paste flavored with ginger or aniseed, were frequently featured in this category. Comfits, which were seeds or nuts coated in layers of solidified sugar, such as almonds or caraway, were also featured. Serving these was just another way to flaunt the laborious and costly procedure. However, the unfortunate and expected result of this sugar-filled diet was tooth devastation. As a noble, your teeth are being methodically ruined by decay, whereas the peasants' teeth were worn down by the grit in their bread. You don't have a toothbrush, fluoride toothpaste, or any idea of dental hygiene other than maybe wiping your mouth out with water or using a rag to touch your teeth. The ideal setting for cavities is created by the continuous exposure to sweets. Stories of nobility experiencing agonizing toothaches, abscesses, and tooth loss abound in the historical record. In sharp contrast to the worn but less damaged teeth of the common people, the wealthy skeletons from this era exhibit horribly poor dental health. A few centuries later, but descended from the same sugar-loving culinary culture, Queen Elizabeth I was well known for having black, decaying teeth. The exact flavor profile of this cuisine is still up for debate among historians. Did the recipes really call for something as horribly sweet as this? Or did a more balanced, sweet and sour taste result from the extensive use of sour substances like vinegar and unripe grape juice? Compared to our current palate, the recipes undoubtedly indicate a palate that was far more accepting of and even eager for sweetness in savory contexts. Your teeth are slowly decaying in your ancient cranium while you sit at your table and eat a piece of sweet pork while your mouth is a battlefield of opposing flavors. A method of eating that is as much about status signaling as it is about flavor. It is a cuisine of aggressive, competitive sweetness. The irony is great. Getting adequate calories was your largest food-related health issue as an impoverished peasant. Now, one of your major health issues as a wealthy lord is directly related to your ostentatious eating of the priciest and most sought-after foods available. Whether you are a lord or a peasant, the strict rules of the Christian Church control your life in addition to the seasons and the availability of food. Furthermore, restricting what you may and cannot eat is one of the most significant ways the religion interferes with your daily life. Meat from land animals is strictly prohibited for over half of the year, every Friday, every Saturday, the full 40 days of Lent in some areas, and numerous other vigils and holy days. The medieval food system and eating habits were completely governed by this widely accepted historical truth. You are compelled to be a pescatarian for a large amount of your life. To a modern ear, this sounds doable, even healthy. You picture freshly cooked fish, maybe accompanied by a squeeze of lemon. You have to throw this nice picture away again. Fish Day does not necessarily mean fresh fish to the great majority of people, particularly those who live on land like you. It denotes fish that has been preserved. It entails putting up with the soul-crushing and monotonous reality of pickled herring and salt cod. One of the biggest and most significant companies of the Middle Ages was born out of the logistical challenges of providing fish to a whole continent on the same days. The Atlantic and North Sea cod and herring fisheries. These fish would be caught in staggering numbers by great fleets of ships. After that, they underwent industrial processing. Oily fish like herring were usually gutted, salted, and then put in barrels to make soused or pickled herring. It had a strong, fishy smell that could make your eyes water, and it was slimy and extremely salty. Two primary methods were used to preserve cod, a thinner fish. It might be dried without salt in the cold, pure air of Norway or Iceland until it formed a hard, rigid board of desiccated fish flesh. Or it could be dried heavily salted, producing the well-known salt cod we saw previously. They called this stockfish. On meatless days, both products were the main source of protein for a large portion of Europe since they were nearly unbreakable and portable. In a sense, they were the lifeblood of Christianity. A fish day meal is dreary to you as a peasant. You buy your salt cod from a traveling trader at a considerable cost, and you take a slice of it. It has a slight swamp odor and is as hard as a piece of wood. First, you have to start the tedious process of turning it into something palatable. To remove the harsh saltiness, you immerse it for at least a day while frequently changing the water. Then, in order to break down the stiff, hard fibers of the flesh, you frequently need to pound it with a wooden mallet. Then, the rehydrated fish is usually flaked and added to the pottage pot, where its fishy, salty flavor will seep into the whole grain, or it can be combined with mashed peas to make a rough fish cake. Although it is nourishing, eating it is a monotonous, repeated task. Fish Day is a challenge, even for you as a lord, but one that you meet with richness and spice. Salt cod isn't your only option. A greater range of preserved fish, such as smoked sturgeon or salted salmon, may be available to you. However, the core issue still exists. It is your cook's responsibility to use all the culinary talent he can summon to cover up these sour, salty preserved goods. The salt cod will be turned into ornate pies with sugar and dried fruit. The fish itself lost its unique texture as it mashed into a pulp. To make a spread for your toast, minced pickled herring will be combined with spices and ground almonds. Disguising the main element as much as possible is the aim. The fish pond is your only significant benefit as a lord. Having a well-stocked fish pond that supplied fresh fish was a status symbol for any house or monastery. Usually stocked with carp, tench, pike, and eels, these ponds were meticulously maintained ecosystems. Your slaves can just go out and catch a fresh carp on Fish Day. Even this, however, is not as ridiculous as it seems. Fish that feed on the bottom, such as carp, can have a muddy, disagreeable flavor. Before being consumed, it was occasionally stored for a few days in a different tank with clean water to flush this out. Naturally, one of those overpowering sweet and sour sauces consisting of vinegar, sugar, and spices would accompany it. The church's concept of fish has a peculiar and intriguing gray area that has resulted in some inventive culinary pitfalls. The meat of land animals was prohibited by the rule. However, what about creatures that were aquatic? A wide variety of semi-aquatic animals were added to the definition of fish. Beavers, especially those with scaly tails, were treasured during Lent and were frequently mistaken for fish. Some church officials also categorized seabirds, including puffins, as fish. Most bizarrely, it was thought that barnacles growing on driftwood were the source of the barnacle goose, an Arctic nesting bird. Lenten eating was totally permissible because of this purported aquatic origin. The actual effects of this religious food restriction are still up for debate among historians. Did making people consume omega-3 rich fish improve their general health? Or did other health problems result from the dependence on highly salted products? In terms of the economy, it greatly influenced exploration and trade. But it produced a calendar of sharp disparities in food for the typical person. The gloomy, fishy duty of a fast day contrasts with the richness of a meat day. Thus, the ghost of a fish dominates your diet for over half the year. Its strong, salty, and faintly rotting fragrance clings to your clothing and permeates your kitchen. It is a taste you learn to fear. It is the taste of obedience and piety. Your magnificent feast is still being prepared, a constant onslaught of taste, sound, and sight. In between the major courses, a unique form of entertainment is presented while servants clean away the dozens of lukewarm dishes. It is intended to make your guests gasp in awe and become a talking point for weeks to come. Subtlety is a type of edible sculpture that symbolizes the pinnacle of food with a non-functional status. A large dish or a decorative board is carried in by a group of servants. It has a carefully constructed scene on it. It may be a miniature castle with battlements, turrets, and little knights on guard. It might be a religious tableau like the Annunciation, or a well-known legendary scene like St. George conquering the dragon. These aren't lumpy, rudimentary things. They are elaborate, finely detailed pieces of art that are frequently gilded and vividly painted. Although they are theoretically composed of edible components, they are not intended for human consumption. The most extravagant banquets of the high and late medieval centuries shared this common historical characteristic. The sotal tea was a kind of culinary theater. a moment of sheer spectacle that was more about showing off your cook's talent and your wealth than it was about providing food. Common themes included a scene honoring the guest of honor, a political allegory, or the host's coat of arms. Using sugar and marzipan as the medium, it was a means of flattering or boasting. These sculptures were primarily made of marzipan, a paste made of powdered almonds and sugar paste, a mixture of sugar and gum tragacanth that resembles modern fondant. They were both very costly. Sugar, as we all know, was quite valuable, and almonds had to be imported. The pinnacle of conspicuous consumerism was to employ these valuable elements for a merely ornamental item that would never be consumed. In essence, it was using money to create art. It took an enormous amount of work to make a sotal tie. Days would be dedicated to a single masterpiece by your master chef, who was as much a sculptor as a chef. He would hand-carve the intricate details after shaping the basic outlines with molds. A glue with a sugar basis would be used to put the parts together. The same food-safe or not-so-safe dyes used for other dishes would then be employed to paint the entire building. Parsley juice for green, sandalwood for red, and saffron for yellow. A thick layer of gold leaf would be used to create a stunning finish. Imagine the sculpture of the dragon and St. George sitting on the table. Green-tinted marzipan is used to individually mold each dragon's scales. Red-hot sugar diamonds make up its eyes. Its mouth emits a plume of spun sugar that resembles smoke. A little, exquisite sword coated with real gold is held by St. George, a strider white horse fashioned of sugar paste. The entire scene is stunning. The guests are in awe of its creativity, craftsmanship, and attention to detail. However, nobody grabs a fork and knife. Eating it would be a horrible faux pas, equivalent to slicing a marble statue with a chisel. Some sotis have a peculiar and somewhat witty quality. They can have surprises or secret traps. There could be a moment of surprise and excitement when a specific section of a castle's hollow interior is raised to reveal a siva eye of real birds that flutter out. The guests were supposed to decipher a sutili, which might also be a sort of puzzle with allegorical figures and inscriptions. It was interactive entertainment that catered to the guests' minds as well as their stomachs. An ancient custom of merely shaping jellies or other delicacies into intriguing shapes gave rise to the tea. However, it had evolved into a unique art form by the 15th century. The entire spectrum of materials used is still up for debate among historians. Less prestigious satiles may have been built from a base of specially prepared bread dough or even wax that was subsequently painted, but the finest works were typically produced with sugar and marzipan. There was no clear distinction between food and ornamental art. A recipe from that era for a sculpture of a deer tells the cook to use real hide for some sections and to build the antlers out of wood or real antlers. The end result was a strange cross between edible and inedible. After the feast, what happens to these amazing creations? They're not consumed. Although they may remain on exhibit for a day or two as a memento of the event's splendor, their eventual fate is not glamorous. Constructed from sugar, gum, dung, and almond paste, they effectively draw in insects and rodents. Eventually, they would be taken apart. For reuse, the priceless gold leaf could be carefully scraped off. Now stale and filthy, the sugar and marzipan would probably be thrown away, or, in a less opulent home, repurposed into another mixture where its texture and purity were irrelevant. Perhaps the best example of the ridiculousness of elite medieval culinary culture is the sot. It is food that has outlived its usefulness. It is no longer food at all, since it has grown so sophisticated, costly, and overly ornate. It is a silent, sugar-coated tribute to a society in which your value was determined by what you ate, or in this case, what you blatantly avoided eating. You, the Lord, are commissioning monuments made of sugar that are meant to be admired and then discarded, while the peasant in the field dreams of a single scrap of flesh that could give him life. There has never been a greater gap between your two worlds. Whether you were a lord or a peasant, your life has been mostly stagnant and limited to the tiny world of your house or village. But you have to go on an adventure today. Maybe you're a peasant traveling to a far-off shrine in hopes of finding healing for a disease or repentance for a transgression. Or you can be a small nobleman attending a tournament or wedding at another lord's castle. You're on the road, for whatever reason. Additionally, your already shaky connection with food becomes much more dangerous, unclear, and filthy while traveling. You don't have a well-sprung carriage, a train, or even a car. You're either walking or, at most, riding a sluggish, low, cunning horse. It's not a poorly paved highway. They are muddy, heavily rutted paths that, when wet, become impassable bogs. On a good day, you might only make 15 or 20 meters. There are no convenience stores, quick food joints, or trustworthy suppliers of wholesome, safe food. What you can carry and what you can find along the route are your only options. You begin your journey as a rural pilgrim with very little. A chunk of your hard, dark bread and maybe a bit of even harder, saltier cheese are in a tiny sack you're carrying. For the first few days, you will eat this. As you walk, you ignore the dry bread and eat it sparingly. Despite the danger, you have no choice but to fill your water flask with water from streams you cross. It's still a risk, even though the water is probably cleaner than the creek in your hamlet. You are forced to depend on the generosity of strangers or the commercial offerings of the cities and inns you travel through when your supplies run out. Monasteries were renowned for providing pilgrims with a bed of straw, the barn, a dole of bread and ale, and simple charity. However, there is no assurance of a warm reception, and these are frequently separated by a day's travel. The alehouse or the inn are your main choices. You reach a settlement at dusk, exhausted and with hurting feet. The inn is filthy, crowded, and noisy. The usual stench of smoke, ale spills, and unwashed people fills the air. Your alternatives are limited because you don't have a lot of money. You're given a spot on the common room floor where you will sleep with a dozen other strangers, according to the innkeeper. You can purchase a bowl of the home pottage and a cup of ale for food, which is always safer than water. This is today's notorious pottage. Over the heat, it simmers in a large cauldron, a constant stew with a far more enigmatic and ephemeral list of ingredients, much like the one in your hut. Whatever is inexpensive, readily available, or about to go bad will be added by the innkeeper. You consume it suspiciously, even if it may contain some stringy parts of old mutton, wilted cabbage, and whatever scraps are left over from the more expensive guest meals. The town's version of the dishonest miller, the innkeeper is a notoriously dishonest person. He is notorious for providing meat of dubious provenance, washing down his lager, and overcharging. Is the meat in this pottage actually mutton, or is it a stray dog or cat, as the ominous jokes imply? You have no choice but to eat it. Your dread is overpowered by your hunger. You have a different but not necessarily better experience as a traveling noble. To manage your luggage, you have a small entourage that includes a servant. You are able to pay for a private room at the inn, which may include the comfort of a bed with a straw mattress that is probably infested with lice and fleas. Although your food alternatives have improved, quality control is still a major issue. The innkeeper will give you a meat pie or a roast chicken after noticing your elegant attire. Your urban susceptibility, however, enters the picture here. This historical truth is widely accepted. Pre-cooked food vendors, the forerunners of contemporary takeaway, were a lucrative sector in medieval towns. Street vendors and cook shops sold roasted meats, hot pies, and pasties. However, the food was frequently dangerously old or produced from spoilt materials, and the cleanliness was terrible. The sale of pies prepared with rotten and foul-smelling meat is condemned in a well-known London proclamation from 1351. The pieman would use a lot of pepper and spices to mask the flavor of his putrid filling, a tactic you are familiar with from your own cuisine. However, he uses it with much more malevolent intent. You are a prime victim for this type of scam because you are an affluent traveler. There is a strange and quite gloomy story of Sweeney Todd, a demon barber who would kill his customers and give the remains to his neighbor, Mrs. Love. It's so she could use them in her well-known meat pies. This story is most likely an urban legend, although it was well known in its day. Despite being a work of fiction, the horror story captures a very genuine and widespread public fear of not knowing what exactly was in the food you purchased from strangers in a city. The usefulness of medieval food laws is still up for debate among historians. The majority of cities had officials and guilds tasked with evaluating the quality of the food. Bakers who sell underweight bread risk fines or imprisonment. Butchers who sell contaminated meat may face penalties, but enforcement was inconsistent and susceptible to corruption. You have no legal protection and were an ideal target for a tourist who was just in town for a day or two. Therefore, traveling is a culinary experience that exposes you to strange food of questionable quality, whether you are wealthy or not. Food poisoning, sometimes known as a surfeited or sick belly, is extremely dangerous. A severe case of diarrhea and vomiting while traveling without access to clean water for rehydration could be fatal. Whether it's the Lord's fiery roast or the peasant home, you yearn for the relative security of your own boring meals. At least you know where the dirt came from. Every meal is a gamble with your health when you're traveling here. Your journey, whether as a pilgrim seeking redemption or a noble seeking shelter, has brought you to a place of profound and unnerving silence, a monastery in a world where medicine is worthless and hygiene is a fantasy, and the noise, filth, and tension of the road fade into a distant feverish memory. You have been given access to this isolated world, a stronghold of piety and order. The tumult of the medieval world seems to vanish as soon as you enter the gatehouse, supplanted by a quietness so total that it seems to be there. The scent of garbage and filth has disappeared from the air. It has the scent of tilled dirt, beeswax, and damp stone. And you're going to consume food that is clean, dependable, and completely soul-crushingly dull for the first time in the entire journey. You have exchanged the tyranny of routine for the horrors of spoiling and scarcity. The bell is now your life. Your days were divided into a strict routine of work, prayer, and reflection. You file into the monastic dining hall, known as the refectory, when the bell tolls for the main course. It's a startling contrast to all the previous dining settings you've experienced. The space is long and narrow, with hardwood tables that have been cleaned and have high ceilings. No rushes are hiding layers of grime on the floor, and there are no dogs running around. The floor is composed of clean, polished flagstones. The only sounds are the gentle swish of woolen robes and the shuffling of sandals. The rule of Saint Benedict, which has been the cornerstone of Western monasticism since the 6th century, governs your supper. This well-known historical text provided a thorough manual for monastic life that included precise dietary guidelines. The purpose of the guideline was not to make meals more enjoyable. It was intended to starve the flesh's wicked appetites while providing the body with just enough nourishment to carry out its functions. All sorts of pleasure posed a spiritual risk, but one of the most powerful was culinary pleasure. You sit down on a plain wooden bench. A wooden bowl, a spoon, and a piece of bread are in front of you. This bread, however, is a revelation. High-quality sifted wheat flour is used to make it. The manchet bread that you previously witnessed being served according to the Lord's will. It is healthy, gentle, and pale. This seems like an unfathomable luxury after a lifetime of gritted, tainted rye or maslin bread. You bite into it. You've never had better bread. And for the remainder of your life here, you will eat this very same bread every day. A serving monk ladles pottage into your bowl while moving softly between the tables. This is not your village's well-known, muddy, never-ending stew. The monastery's pristine well provides the pure water used to make this pottage. The veggies, onions, cabbage, peas, and leeks, come from the monastery's spotless, well-kept gardens, where you might have been laboring just hours earlier. There are no enigmatic grits, no trace of sourness from leftovers from the previous day. It is healthy, nourishing, and pure. In addition, it is nearly unseasoned. The guideline promoted obsessiveness, which meant using salt and other basic condiments sparingly. Spices were forbidden because they were seen to be essential, hedonistic luxury. It tastes like boiling vegetables in your pottage. It's similar to a dish from a contemporary health food resort, but without the 5-star reviews and Instagram filter. There is complete stance throughout the meal. Talking is prohibited. The lector, a lone monk who stands at a lectern and reads aloud passages from the Bible or the lives of the saints, is the only sound in the room. The scrape of your spoon against the wooden bowl reverberates in the large, silent hall while you eat slowly and deliberately. There is no community in the sense of having a conversation with others, no laughter and no discussion. Eating is not a social activity, but a serious act of meditation and a moment for spiritual sustenance. The idea of telling the monk next to you that the pottage is especially watery today is a small transgression in and of itself, but you really want to do it. Saint Benedict famously banned everyone but the very sick from eating the meat of 4-legged animals. Therefore, you get your protein from other sources. Simple cooked beans and peas are provided to you. There may be a slice of cheese from the monastery's dairy or eggs from their chickens on a good day. Of course, there are fish from the monastery's well-kept fish ponds. The Lord has the same carp and tench. However, in this case, it is not covered up with a strong, sweet sauce. It's just poached or cooked. Its filthy taste was unrepentantly displayed. However, there is a peculiar little exception, a tiny allowance for human weakness called a pittance. A pittance was a modest treat or additional dish served on a feast day to honor a guest, or as a thank you for putting in extra effort. It may be a richer cheese, a tiny honey-filled pastry, or a piece of better fish. This monastery tradition of a small philanthropic extra is the source of the word itself, which today denotes a very small and insufficient sum. The most thrilling culinary moment you can think of is when a pittance appears on your table. As monasteries became wealthier and more influential throughout time, historians continue to debate whether the stringent dietary regulations, especially the prohibition on meat, were strictly adhered to. There are surprisingly many non-fish bones found in archaeological evidence from several monastic locations. The idea of the Misericorde, a distinct dining area with looser regulations, has resulted from this. Here, the monastery doctor could prescribe a healing dinner of chicken or even beef away from the main refectory for monks who were sick or had just been bled. It was an ingenious method of upholding the law's letter in the main hall while drastically altering it behind the scenes. St. Anoni's fire is not going to reach you here in this tidy, organized world. A dishonest innkeeper won't cause you to contract food poisoning. Sand bread won't cause you to grit your teeth. However, the type of culinary prison you are in is different. It is a jail of purposefully sanctified tedium. The goal of the diet is to suppress cravings, dull the senses, and transform eating from a pleasurable activity into a basic physiological need, much like breathing. The meal is the most dependable, safest, and highest quality you have ever experienced. Furthermore, it is unquestionably the most purposefully, deeply, and soul-crushingly dull cuisine in history. At the conclusion of this lengthy and unappetizing road, you find yourself standing here. You have been the drafty lord in the big hall and the shivering peasant in the smoky cottage. You have experienced the bloated fatigue of a 5-hour feast and the numbing emptiness of the hungry gap. You have experienced the bitter pleasure of prestige and the grimness of misery. You may see the truth with a heart-breaking clarity from this vantage point, looking back at the two extremes of this planet. The system as a whole was flawed, an all-around spectacular failure. The food wasn't the only issue. It was that the idea of food itself had been tainted, For the vast majority of people, including peasants, the system failed because it was unable to consistently deliver the one thing it was meant to: nourishment. This failure was demonstrated by your life. The monotonous, never-ending cycle of brownish-gray bread and brownish-gray pottage characterized the life. It was a race against rot pests, a life of perpetual low-level anxiety and the continual prospect of famine. The cuisine wasn't merely tasteless, it was deliberately unfriendly, causing you to be poisoned by fungus, wear out your teeth with grit, and fail you entirely amid a poor harvest. The only objective of this diet of pure function was to consume enough calories to work the land, which would then yield more of the same deplorable food. There was little nourishment, no happiness, and no choice. The first farm-to-face plant encounter was this one. After that, you enter the world of the nobility across the Great Divide and discover a system that is flawed in a different, more subtle way. Here, grotesque and hollow excess rather than scarcity is the issue. Rich people didn't eat better. They simply began eating in increasingly strange ways. Food was no longer a source of sustenance. It evolved into a medical chart, a theatrical prop, and a weapon in the toolbox of social status. Eating your wealth and putting your power on display for everyone to see was the aim. A cuisine of pure artifice resulted from this. Inedible sculptures were created by reassembling tough, stringy peacocks. To conceal the fact that the meat was spoiling and to demonstrate that you could afford the sugar, good meat was covered with a cloaking layer of spices and sugar, not to make it taste good. Because the reviewer would probably pass away from a tooth abscess before he could post, the culinary world would receive 0 stars on Yelp. The foundation of this entire dysfunctional system was a strong ideology, the mainstream philosophical concept of the great chain of being. This held that every single thing in the universe from God down to the lowest stone had its own fixed place in a divine hierarchy. This applied to people, kings, lords, peasants, and it applied to their food. The Lord ate the crane that flew high in the air closer to God. You, the peasant, ate the turnip that grew in the dirt. Your diet was a reflection of your soul's station. This philosophy justified the inequality, making the peasant's starvation and the Lord's wasteful excess seem like a natural God-given order. The Lord's kitchen was a testament to this obsession with performance. A quirky historical detail is the sheer level of specialization among kitchen staff in a great household. You wouldn't just have a cook, you'd have a master cook. And under him a spicer who handled the precious spices, a sorcerer for the sauces, a wafer for making delicate dessert wafers. This wasn't just for efficiency. It was conspicuous consumption of labor, proving you could afford an army of specialists to create your theatrical meals. Historians continue to debate whether the medieval food system should be judged as a complete failure or as a remarkably resilient, if deeply flawed, adaptation to immense technological and ecological constraints. It's true that without modern transport, chemistry, and technology, they did what they could. But the core of the problem remains. For rich and poor alike, the food was a lie. The peasant's pottage was a lie of sustenance, offering bulk without reliable nutrition. The noble's feast was a lie of pleasure, offering spectacle without genuine flavor or comfort. You are left with 2 final foul morsels. In one hand, you hold a lump of the peasant's bread, gritty, sour, but honest in its desperation. In the other, you hold a piece of the Lord's sugary meat, a riot of expensive spice and cloying sweetness, desperately trying to hide the taste of decay beneath. Both are the product of a failed system. Both are in their own way the worst food in history. One is the food of a body in peril, the other the food of a culture that has lost its senses. And so our long, strange meal comes to an end. We can leave this world of perpetual pottage and gilded peacocks behind, letting the smoke of the peasant's hearth and the cold draughts of the Lord's hall fade into the quiet murmur of the past. Let the memory of the gritty bread and the cloying, spicy sauces dissolve and allow yourself to return to the simple, clean reality of your own quiet room. Think for a moment of the reassuring hum of a refrigerator, a modern magic that holds decay at bay with a gentle, constant breath. Consider the clear, cool glass of water you can drink without a moment's fear, a simple luxury that would have seemed a miracle in the world we just left. Here, in the safety of your own time, the anxieties of survival can give way to a softer, slower rhythm as your own body prepares for a restful sleep, secure in the knowledge that your next meal will be neither a punishment nor a performance. The images of that distant, difficult time are softening now, the sharp edges of hunger and the garish colors of the feast blending together, becoming less a harsh reality and more a story that has been told. The tale is over. The journey is done. All that is left are the fading whispers of history lulling you gently toward your dreams.